I click the toggle, for me, it's not working for some reason. I've never had the problem before. So what do you?
If you just try clicking on your video right now, it may give you an option to rename, and then you can type your name in.
I don't think we have enough time for him to figure that out. Let's go with Martha.
Yeah.
Well,
No
okay.
offense, Bill, but we're okay with your masculinity.
Yeah, good. Thanks. I'm doing the best I can, you know. Anyway, all right. So do we have everyone here? Let's see. All right, we'll go ahead and Chris, we ready to call the meeting to order, you think?
Yeah, we're all good.
All right. Okay, so we're going to call the meeting to order. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by the board in preparation of the 2020 annual meeting notice, which sets forth the date, time, and place of this meeting, and by properly posting such notice and forwarding the notice to those designated newspapers and persons requesting meeting notices. Moreover, in order to comply with the national and state declarations of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the municipal land use law, the Open Public Meetings Act, and the recent operational documents from the Department of Community Affairs, this meeting is being held virtually as a web-based platform with remote public access. All right, so shall we go to our Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To
to
the
the flag
flag
of the United
of the United
States
States of America,
and to the
to
republic
the republic
for which it
for which
stands,
it stands,
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty
with liberty and
and
justice
for all.
for all.
Very good. Okay. Shall we have a roll call, Chris?
Or Mr. Chairman, Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff, he's unmuting.
Present.
Okay. Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Here.
Councilmember Little,
Here.
Ms. McNeil,
Here.
Mr. Delory,
Here.
Mr. Zucker,
Here.
Mr. Perrella,
Here.
Mr. Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli.
Here.
For the record, Mr. Warner is here. You have a quorum. You can proceed.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Actually, Bill, real quick, is Michael, our court reporter, present as well? Yes, I see him as well. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hi.
We have meeting minutes from September 23rd and October 14th, and I'd like to know if any one of the members of the board have any comments, additions, deletions, corrections. Anyone waving their hand, Chris? Okay.
I don't see anything now. We should do each one individually though, so.
All right. Okay. So let's take a look at the meeting minutes for September 23rd. I don't have any, I don't see any comments. I don't have any comments on them either. They were pretty straightforward. We're pretty short. All right, October 14th, our special session there.
We should move approval.
We should move on.
Yes, thanks. Can I have a motion to approve, I guess, the meeting minutes from the 23rd?
So moved.
And a second,
Second.
Second.
and just a voice vote, Chris?
Yeah, all in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
Any
All right.
opposed?
So,
Aye.
on to October 14th, any comments, questions, additions, deletions for those notes? They're a little bit longer. They're fine. All right, not hearing any comments or questions. Can I have a motion to approve the October 14th meeting minutes?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
All right, Chris?
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none.
So on our agenda tonight, just spend a minute on the agenda. We're going to take the council referral items 6A and 6B and move them to the back of the public hearing tonight. Also with regard to Beechwood at Summit LLC, they requested that that there be carried to the next meeting. Anything that Mr. Warner or Chris want to add to that?
Chris, is that going to be December 21?
Yes, that's correct. They are carried to December 21st and they have waived the time for the board to act.
And that'll be 7:30 PM, anticipated to be like this meeting, a remote access web-based platform meeting.
That is correct.
Right. So then in addition to some schedule, as you can see at the back of the schedule, we have an executive session. So Mr. Giannetti, I understand you've spoken to Mr. Warner. What we're going to do tonight is because we have these 3 items that we have to get through in addition to the business of the application for Primrose, is to go from now till 10 o'clock for Primrose and try to get as much in as possible as we can. And we hope that Michael can hold out until 10 o'clock. Can you hold out till 10, Michael, then take a break for 15 minutes? Okay, great, thanks. So I think that would be the most expeditious way to move through tonight's hearing. Anything to add to that, Mr. Warner or Chris?
Nothing here.
Oh, we also have to talk about the schedule too. We have got a list of next year's meetings. We just need to talk about that a little bit.
Bill, I would just note that the 43 Woodland is also carried without further notice.
Yes, yep, Beechwood at Summit LLC, right, okay. Yep, 43 Woodland. All right, so that's the,
Somebody's banging plates or glass. There's something banging in the background. Who's ever doing that? It's really, please stop. Sorry, Bill.
that could be my house. Let's go ahead and start. We can hear, I guess, from Mr. Giannetti, unless you have anything else, Mr. Warner.
Nothing from me, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman, members of the board, Craig Genetti of the law firm Day Pitney, on behalf of the applicant Primrose School Franchising Company. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo, but hopefully as we go through, it'll disappear. This is a continued application for preliminary and final major site plan approval with variance relief, as well as a lot consolidation in connection with property at 480 and 490 Morris Avenue, currently occupied by 2 office buildings, or really 1 office building, though it looks like 2, where we're proposing to demolish one of the buildings and then renovate it for a daycare center, in addition to an office on the 2nd floor. This is our 5th meeting. We had meetings on August 24th, September 23rd, October 14th, and October 26th, presenting various testimony of our experts concerning the application, as well as getting feedback from the board and the public. As the board may recall, at the October 26th meeting, we finished the testimony and public questioning of our architect, James Say, and wanted to present a conceptual plan of changes that Primrose was considering for the site based upon the feedback we received. And we introduced and had sworn in Matthew Seckler as an expert in the field of planning and traffic engineering. And he gave a summary of those proposed changes. And then we indicated in advance of this meeting, we would fully engineer the plans. And I'm still hearing feedback. I don't know if others
Yes.
are hearing that.
Little bit.
Maybe
Yeah.
everybody should mute except Mr. Giannetti. See if that helps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at that meeting, or we did submit the revised plans, in addition to a cover letter from Stonefield Engineering identifying the proposed changes to the plans, and as well as some of the comments of the board professional review letters. So what I would like to do this evening is we have Mr. Seckler, who's already been sworn in and begun some testimony as an expert in the field of planning and traffic testimony. If you recall, we also have Matt Taylor of Primrose School, who could address any issues concerning operations. Mr. Seckler is aware of the operations of the school and can address a number of the issues, we're sure, but in case there might be something specific, we have Mr. Taylor from Primrose. And ideally, what I would like to do is present Mr. Seckler's testimony on both traffic engineering and planning, which would also address the plan revisions that were submitted to the board. And if there is an operations question that comes up that Mr. Seckler can address, if we can maybe just bring Mr. Taylor up at that point, to address the question, and we could kind of address it all at once. And then obviously when it comes time for public questioning, they can ask Mr. Seckler and Mr. Taylor questions as to their testimony.
Is anyone else getting any feedback or background noise at all? I see that Miss Amanda Wolf maybe didn't mute her line. If she's available, maybe she could mute hers and maybe that'll help. I'm still getting a little feedback. And
Yeah, Amanda's disconnected entirely from audio, so it's not her.
All right, okay. All right, well, everybody on this call, except for Chris and myself, which I'm going to mute right now. Hopefully that'll be better, Mr. Giannetti.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, just Mr. Seckler was sworn previously. He remains under oath. He was accepted by the board as an expert both in professional planning and as a traffic engineer. I just wish he would confirm for us that his license in New Jersey in both capacities remains in good standing.
Yes, they are.
Okay, appreciate that. Then, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, we can turn it back to Mr. Giannetti for the continuation of the direct examination of Matthew Seckler.
Absolutely. Mr. Giannetti, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Seckler, at the end of the last meeting with the board, we presented conceptual plans and discussed various changes we're proposing to the site plan. Since that time, you and your Office of Stonefield Engineering, along with the architects looked at this matter again and submitted a revised site plan along with some revised renderings in connection with this application. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And on the town website is some of those exhibits that we submitted for tonight's meeting. Wrong button. One, which is identified as Engineering Exhibit 112120, and another that is identified as Architectural Exhibit 112120. Is that correct?
That is correct.
If maybe if you have the ability to share your screen, if you can just bring those up, we can have them marked for identification purposes so you can use them during your testimony, just so we have them kind of into evidence. I believe we are at Exhibit A8, Mr. Warner, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Giannetti.
Thank you.
And Mr. Nicola confirmed that.
Do you have a preference which one gets marked first? Was either one of them?
Yeah, I would mark first the color rendering of the site plan, the revised site plan. I think that's the Engineering Exhibit 112120.
Okay, I'll share my screen so we can mark that as an exhibit. Okay, what's before the board, and again, this was uploaded to the city's website. This is titled Rendered Site Plan Exhibit Sheet 1 of 1, prepared by Stonefield Engineering Design. The last revision date is November 12th, 2020. What it shows, and again, I'll just briefly describe that it's a colorized version of our site plan with both the landscaping as well as the site plan shown on this for visual representation of things such as landscape buffers, the color of pavement, the differentiating of the buildings along with existing conditions outside of the limits of the project.
Great, and then if you could also bring up the 112120 architectural exhibits, which is a series of revised renderings. Well, maybe you could describe what these renderings are.
Yes, and again, this is the architectural exhibit. This is prepared by KLS Architect. The revision date on here is November 20th, 2020. It is a 4-sheet set. The first sheet, RE1, is the view from Morris Ave looking towards the corner, looking southeast. The next exhibit is the view from Morris Ave looking southwest. So again, this is looking from, I guess, the Gates area towards Webster. The third sheet is along Webster. And again, you'll see the enhanced landscaping in front of the playground area, the outdoor play equipment area that is on RE3. And RE4 is a photo exhibit or a view from the parking lot looking north. So this is if you are hovering above the trees that separate our property from the residential property in the rear, the I believe it's lot 4 on Gates Avenue. This is what the image would be. So that's RE4. So those are the 4 sheets.
And that is all marked as Exhibit A9.
Okay.
And Mr. Warner, I'll proffer that Mr. Cassay and his firm prepared these renderings in connection with the revised site plan prepared by Stonefield and in coordination with Stonefield Engineering and Mr. Seckler's office. Mr. Seckler will be using these exhibits in his testimony, and we'd like them, marked and moved into evidence if necessary. If there's any concerns or questions from the board, we could bring Mr. Cassay up to confirm these renderings were prepared by him, but I will proffer that as what he's going to say.
And that's appropriate, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and certainly Mr. Seckler could testify as to these renderings. And as stated by Mr. Giannetti, if there's anything he can't answer, the fact that Mr. Cassay, the architect, is available is a good thing, so we can call upon him if necessary. So I'm fine with that, Mr. Chairman.
Great. So, Mr. Seckler, maybe what would be good in just kind of the outline, the points to hit, since you are both accepted as an expert in the field of traffic engineering and planning, is maybe using the exhibit A8, the revised site plan, and just walk through the changes that were made to this plan. And then I think that would naturally flow into your testimony as to traffic, and then eventually into planning, addressing the variances. So just maybe starting with A8, if you could just kind of highlight for the board the changes that were made from the last site plan based on the feedback.
Absolutely. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit to hopefully highlight some points a little easier. And I'm going to see if I could use some of these Zoom tools. So I'm going to start with A8, the site plan, and I'll kind of go through the changes that were made, starting with coming into the site as if you were coming into the site from Morris Avenue. One of the first things you'll notice that we made a change was that we actually have changed the first parking space as you enter the site. As you enter the site previously, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that the parking space closest to Morris Avenue may have been undersized. It may have been in a condition that if someone backed out of that space, it would perhaps have to back out onto the sidewalk or even into Morris Avenue in order to properly circulate the site. So we actually did is we got rid of the space that was closest to Morris Avenue, and that was one of the changes we made to the circulation design. In addition, we made a change to the freestanding sign, which again I am pointing to as well, also located on that now larger grass buffer between Morris Avenue and our first parking spot. Part of what we did is by eliminating that parking space, we were also able to slide that freestanding sign back. I believe that freestanding sign was set back a little under 2 feet originally, and now it is set back 7.6 feet from the curb line. So we were able to slide that Primrose Monument sign, and you'll see that on the later architectural renderings, but we were able to slide that back. Continuing down into the site, one of the next changes that we made was we relocated the ADA parking spaces. So as you enter the site, the first parking spaces you would see on your right when you enter will be the ADA parking spaces. That was a slight change. They were located elsewhere within the site. We still maintain a accessible path to the doorways with the location of these ADA spaces. Next up, and I think this was one of the key features that we heard a lot of discussion about, was about the trash enclosure. If this board remembers, the trash enclosure used to be where this grass buffer island is. If you went in from Morris Ave and basically drove a car all the way to the property line of lot 4, we've eliminated the trash enclosure in that location and provided a smaller trash enclosure with more of a kind of a smaller trash can arrangement as opposed to a big dumpster. And that is now located close to the building and at sufficient distance from any of the residential properties. So we now have this trash enclosure located more interior to the site as opposed to locating it at the rear of the site or along the residential business zone property line. So that is another change that was made. In addition, now heading towards, if you entered the site and you got to the end of the aisle and you made a right, we have redesigned the parking field located in the back of the building compared to what it was in the previous iteration. We believe that this design provides for a simpler arrangement for what is most likely going to be mainly utilized by the parents during their drop-off and pickup periods. And again, during my traffic engineering testimony, which will be shortly, you'll hear significant testimony about how many parents we expect to be dropping off at any one time, how the drop-off and pickup occurs, and that type of operation. So we've changed the way that the parking lot lays out. We've also added what we illustrate here as kind of a backup space or a K-turn space, this hatched area located closest to the playground equipment. So again, we've redesigned the way the parking field lays out, especially in this rear main parking field. In addition, you'll notice here, but you'll also notice that for every space, we've indicated a sign symbol indicating that there will be signs posted on spaces to indicate whether it is an employee-only space, whether it is for parent drop-off and pickup during certain times of the day, whether it's for, or whether there are spaces for the other office buildings tenants within this parking field or their visitors. So again, we've indicated, and it's tough to see on some of these parking spaces because of the vegetation, but we've indicated that we are going to show signage along all parking spaces so people will understand where their proper parking area is. Now heading towards the playground, one of the things that we've heard from the residents and the board was some concern regarding the landscape buffer area that we have in the rear of the site separating our property and our playground equipment from the nearest dwelling on Webster Avenue. That would be lot 23. What we've done is we've added a fence within our site so that there is no way to basically trespass or utilize this landscape buffer area as a kind of a cut through. So we did add a fence along our property to prevent any type of pedestrian cross traffic in this area. What we've also done is we've pushed the location of the fence on the playground equipment area interior to the playground. So we've slid the fence off of the top of the wall that we've heard significant discussion about to allow for plantings of trees and vegetation along the top of the wall so that any residents on lot 23, instead of seeing a fence at the top of this wall, they'll basically see vegetation at the top of this wall. In addition, to remind the board, we are heavily vegetating the buffer area between our property and lot 23 on Webster Avenue. So the bottom of the wall, the middle of the wall will basically be screened by the vegetation, the natural vegetation at ground level. But again, at the top of the wall, we have added vegetation along the fence line. That fence line has also been indicated that it'll be a 4-foot high composite fence. The composite fence that we're looking at is a noise dampening fence based on what we believe in terms of reading the specifications for the type of fence we're looking at here. It can reduce noise in the range of 6 to 8 decibels. So again, this we think is listening to members of the public, and some concerns raised by the board was the fact that we're looking to dampen or reduce the noise that emanates from the playground during the daytime hours that the playground is in use for the proposed childcare facility. Heading a little bit, I guess, heading also in difficult to see within this image, but hidden underneath all of this landscape is a yard inlet. There was concerns about the drainage and what would happen in terms of the rain and the drainage patterns in this vegetative area. What you'll see on the engineering plans, or you would have seen on the engineering plans, is that we've added a yard inlet and connected that inlet into the public storm system, so that any water that gets within this vegetated area will grade into the yard inlet, and then that runoff will end up being transported underground into the city system and then continue on its way. So we're not looking at we're looking at preventing any type of flooding or kind of uncontrolled runoff area. Heading now a little further to the left of this image, and again, from this image, it's difficult to tell, but we'll show in a few minutes on A9, the increased vegetation that is being planted along the buffer on Webster Avenue, between Webster Avenue and the playground area of the Primrose. So what we've done is we've increased the plantings in this area, and in addition, adjusted the plantings not only here but also along the entire site. We've looked for more native species, and I think we've gotten a comment letter that reflected that we did a much better job with this, picking out the species in terms of this landscape design than the previous one. And we'll continue to work with any of the board's experts or committees in terms of ensuring that all of the species meet the goals of the local forester or anyone else that has approval powers regarding the vegetation that's planted on the site. Now heading further to the east, one of the things that we did in terms of being able to relocate the dumpster and redo this parking aisle is we've also increased the setback between the residential zone and our disturbance. Previously, it was about 3.1 feet between the residential property line, which is lot 4 on Gates Avenue, and the asphalt disturbance or the curb, and there's a board-on-board fence between. That was mimicking the existing condition. We've increased that buffer to 5 feet with that board-on-board fence in between. So we are increasing the amount of buffer between the residential property line and our disturbance on our lot compared to the existing condition. So that is an improvement that we're showing on this plan. And then lastly, when leaving the site, what we've done is, and again, we've designated with showing signs in these areas, we are in agreement with the board engineer's recommendation of installing employee-only parking spaces for these 3 parking spaces as you exit the site onto Gates Avenue. So I believe that is generally what changes as they relate to the site plan. Unless our council has any objection, I would move to the architectural plan just so you could see it instead of the bird's eye view, you'll see it a little bit more from the street level view.
I think it makes sense moving to exhibit A9 and just going through the renderings to kind of give another visual of the changes.
Yep, and again, so this is A9. This is the first sheet, and this is basically looking from the Webster Avenue, Morris Avenue intersection. Again, what we're showing here and highlighting here is the increased landscaping along Webster Avenue between the roadway and the playground area in the rear of the site. We also showed, I think, a little bit enhancement of the vegetation along Morris Avenue as well. The next sheet, which is sheet 2, again, this is the image looking towards the site from, I guess, kind of the Gates Avenue area, as if you're coming from Gates Avenue towards Webster Avenue along Morris Avenue. Again, I think this rendering, I think this sign might be showing a little bit closer to the street than what we're proposing, but again, this kind of slid back into this vegetation compared to what was previously shown here. Actually, I do want to go back. I think there was some questions at the previous hearing regarding bus stops and where bus stops are being located or will those still be located. Again, RE1 in exhibit A9, the bus stop generally exists and will remain basically where the lower building or the new portion of this building will be constructed and heads back towards Webster Avenue. So the bus stop will remain in that location. Now jumping ahead to RE3, this is where you could see the enhanced landscaping along the Webster Avenue frontage. Again, I think that's clearly what we're trying to show with this image is that increased landscaping, and from the street level, you would not be able to see the children on the other side of the fence or the landscape in this area. And then this is kind of a above elevation view, basically from the tops of the vegetation, and basically the property line of lot 4 along Gates Avenue, looking into the site and seeing the new design of the parking lot as it lays out before you. Again, this is not an image you would see from the ground from the property of lot 4, but this is up in the air looking down at the site. So if
Mr. Seckler, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Would you have an idea of roughly how far above the ground your eye would be at this point?
I'm going to take a stab at it based on the vegetation. So hold on, let me pull up the landscape plan to take a quick peek at that growth height. That is a coupling. Okay, so these trees are planted at 6 foot high. I'll tell you that this is above 6 feet high because I don't see the fence. So my guess is this is probably at an 8 to 10 foot. So maybe after these vegetation's been planted for 2 to 3, somewhere between 2 to 5 years, that would be what this elevation would be.
Thank you.
But you're above the fence line, so you're at least above 6 feet here.
Great, thanks.
And again, I don't know if that's an answer that Jim would like to change the answer to that, but I'm just judging based on not seeing the fence and seeing the tops of these trees. So again, I believe that summarizes the changes from the last hearing. I don't know if there was any. We also made some changes in terms of some of the parking lot lights. Again, as we reworked the interior parking field, we did have to move the location of some lights. We saw to where we were had the light poles along the residential line. We looked to reduce them from a 15-foot height to a 12-foot height. And again, these lights will have house side shields, which basically means that the light is pointed and directed down and not behind. These are all LED lights, and which allows for the lights to really be focused. Again, the Primrose generally is not in use after their last pickup hours. So this is not a use that requires extensive lighting into the nighttime hours, other than general security lighting. And again, I think there was extensive testimony about this, but we also would be in agreement, as most boards and engineers wish, is after, should this board approve this application, following construction, usually the first 6 months that this site's in operation, you work with the town engineer to kind of tweak the lighting to make sure that there are no hot spots and that the lights go off at the appropriate time and there's no spillage. So you could basically go out in the field with a light meter and ensure that you're at a 0-foot candle at the adjoining property lines, that the house side shields are working appropriately. So overall, I guess I'll default to my counsel. If there's any other things that he'd like to discuss about these site plan changes, if not, I'd love to get into some traffic testimony, but I'll listen to the board.
I think we've addressed, and maybe just is available to confirm the height of that view that the chairman asked with respect to that one rendering. Jim, are you on?
Yes.
And you remain under oath. You've been sworn in previously, and you remain under oath with respect to your testimony this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Giannetta.
We assumed a growth of that species of tree in the 3 to 5 year range of 12 to 14 feet. So that's roughly at 16 feet above ground.
Great. Thank you, Jim. That was it on the rendering, unless there are any follow-up, Chairman, as to that particular rendering. And I think at this point,
Mr. Giannini, so that, I don't want to testify on your behalf, but that would be something like around a person standing on a second floor looking into the parking lot, something like that?
Jim, would you?
I'm not going to answer for Jim, but I assume that would mean that the second floor window would be at the property line, right? Because is that what you're asking, Chairman?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of makes you feel like you're in a structure looking down at it. And I just that's what answering the question I was sort of thinking about was, am I sort of standing in the second floor of an adjacent building looking down into a parking lot? That's just kind of the way it feels.
It may be a little higher than that. I would think you're probably around, it's probably close to that. You're around 14 feet standing height on a second floor.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So, Mr. Secretary, I guess getting back to your testimony, think, there's been a lot of questions, concerns about traffic and internal circulation, and your office prepared a traffic study in connection with this application.
Yes, we did.
And if you could just maybe outline as in preparing the traffic study, kind of what you looked at, what you reviewed, and how it was prepared.
Yes, absolutely. And again, we prepared a traffic impact study for this application, and this is quite unusual times being a traffic engineer and looking to give testimony, because we are, with the pandemic going on, not quite at your normal traffic conditions and haven't been for a number of months. So there are a number of things that we undertook to kind of get an understanding of what the typical volumes are like on the roadways in the area, and then also to get an understanding of what the typical volumes are like and how the operations work at a Primrose daycare. So I guess I'll start first with what we investigated in terms of getting an understanding of what volumes are like on Morris Avenue and the adjoining streets. I'm a county resident. I'm very familiar with Morris Avenue. I have many friends that live in Summit and commute along this way. I am well aware of the volume of traffic that utilizes Morris Avenue. Morris Avenue is an arterial roadway, meaning it's like the arteries of your body. It pumps traffic through the roadway network, similar to the way your arteries pump blood through your system to keep your body alive. So that's the purpose of Morris Avenue. Along this roadway, and I'm going to flip over to the aerial exhibit, which I believe was previously marked. I'm unsure, Craig, in terms of what letter this was, but it was previously on the website.
This is exhibit A1.
A1, okay.
Yep.
A1. So again, understanding that this is a roadway that not only, like most arterial roads, serve as a connector to higher level roads such as state highways or interstate highways, Morris Avenue also, for this local area, has a very high amount of educational uses, which have their own specific types of peaks for roadways. So again, you have oratory prep, you have Washington School, you have the high school, you have a number of schools along this area. So you see a mix on Morris Avenue of traffic between your commuters, your students, whether they're driving or their parents are driving, or that type of commuting pattern is what we see along Morris Avenue. Now, again, unfortunately, during the time that we've been retained for this project, we haven't seen your typical standard combination of commuter traffic flow and school traffic flow to be able to do what we would typically do in terms of going out to the intersections, doing traffic counts, videotaping traffic, getting an understanding of how difficult it is to make left turns, right turns, find parking, things of that nature. So we've been kind of hamstrung with that. But what we've done is we've basically taken what the industry has said is what to do when you are in these unusual time periods. And what we did is we looked at what data was publicly available for this stretch of Morris Avenue. And we looked at the New Jersey Department of Transportation, which collects traffic along roadways. And they had two traffic counts, one from December 2011 and one from April 2017. We also looked and requested from your board's professionals if they had any nearby, any traffic studies done on any nearby roads, so we could also, again, try to find this data that's out there that shows your typical condition. And in that, we actually found a traffic study done for the Celgene property that had counts from also 2017. Now, I know this area from driving through. Again, I go to a number of restaurants in this area. I've gone to La Focaccia a number of times. I do know that the bridge on Morris Ave was out for a number of that time period as well. So I know in looking back and seeing some of the DOT data or seeing some of the Celgene data, I need to be wary of the fact that the bridge on Morris Ave was out for a portion of that time period as well. So the data that I felt most comfortable utilizing was actually before the bridge was out back in 2011, but took that data and continually grew that data. So I'm not using the data that was collected in 2011 and just ending it at that point. I'm taking the data that was collected in 2011 and growing it into the future, growing it from 2011 to current day, accounting for new redevelopment, new developments, new vacancies that may be occupied now, maybe even developments that are outside the limits of Summit that may be adding traffic to Morris Avenue. So we took that data from 2011 and grew it all the way up to current day, 2020, and then also even looked at it, what would things be like 2 years into the future, hopefully if things get back to normal after the pandemic, what traffic would be like along Morris Avenue. And again,
Mr. Sheckler, in doing that extrapolation, are you using, when you said factoring development, are you taking counts from or factoring using ITE what would be produced from development, or is it using a percentage factoring each year from 2011, 2012, 2013 to kind of extrapolate it out?
Yeah, so there's actually multiple formulas we utilized. One was we looked at growth rates that the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority has seen for traffic volume growth just generally in the area, generally within Union County between 2011 and today. And there they see that traffic has been growing about 0.6% annually. So we have this kind of compounding factor of traffic increase throughout the county. And then we also assumed some general redevelopment for the Celgene property. So we accounted for about 100 new single-family houses in that area. Again, I have honestly no idea in terms of what is actually proposed or going to be developed on some of these properties. We basically just assumed we threw another 100 residents just to account for areas like that that may see future development. And then we also took the DOT's value for what they expect traffic volume growth to be over the next 2 to 3 years for county roads in Union County, and grew that 1% for those kind of 2 years to get from 2020 to 2022. So again, we took what I think is a conservative estimate of increased traffic volumes for this corridor on top of what was counted way back in 2011. And so that was how we got kind of the background data for the Morris Avenue corridor to get an understanding of what type of traffic volumes we would expect here. The second thing we did was to get an understanding of how much traffic our site would generate and how do they operate? How does a Primrose operate? And what we did is we went to Primrose and got data dating back to January 2020 for how the Berkeley Heights and Mountainside sites operate. So what we were able to get from those sites, we got 3 days of data, January 6th, 7th, and 8th. And Primrose has told us that the January, February months are typically their peak months in terms of enrollments, the number of students they have in their programs. And we were able to see, looking back pre-pandemic, what they have in terms of the number of parents that drop off, how many parents are dropping off at specific time periods, what time periods are the most popular time periods to drop off, all the way down to getting understanding of how many students did or how many children did each parent drop off, because we could see, oh, this person checked in, the two students were checked in by this parent within the same 10 seconds or within the same 20 seconds. We were able to get their check-in, check-out data for their students to get an understanding, and so we can model how many, again, the traffic and drop-off conditions that exist at a Primrose during non-pandemic times. We also were able to get staff data from February for both the Berkeley Heights and Mountainside sites to get an understanding of how their staff arrives. Because again, when you're thinking about parking impacts or traffic impacts, it's a combination of the students, the parents dropping off the children, and the employees coming to work the site. So we basically have these two data points that we collected. Again, we didn't go out and do counts because it's the pandemic. Not every parent is sending their kid to daycare. Maybe the daycares have different enrollment levels now. We look back pre-pandemic in the winter months of 2020 and to get an understanding of how this specific site would operate so that we could take some real life data from nearby similar communities and have an understanding of what type of traffic this site would generate, what type of parking this site would generate, and what would the drop-off and pickup features be like at this site. So those were the two main pieces of data that we utilized as part of our study. Then what we did is to get an understanding of how the site would generate from a traffic standpoint. We took that data from the staff arrival times and the student drop-off and pickup times and added that to the roadway network. So we added that to get an understanding of okay, if people are making a left turn in from Morris Avenue or a right turn in from Morris Avenue, how much traffic are we talking about adding at this driveway entering in the site from Morris Avenue? And what do we have in terms of traffic when they leave? Everyone has to leave onto Gates Avenue. Again, because although the existing site has 2 driveways on Webster Avenue servicing one building, and the in driveway and out driveway on Morris Avenue and Gates servicing the other building, the proposed development has only one means of entry and one means of egress, in on Morris, out on Gates, just as the existing office building to the east has always operated. So we took the volume that we got from the other Primrose schools, and we're able to generate how many cars are making a left turn in, right turn in, and left turn out onto Gates Avenue during your peak hours. Now, again, my associate, Mr. Klein, earlier in the testimony, way back at the first hearing, mentioned something saying this is not a school. And I think that one of the key aspects, or the key pieces, at least from a traffic engineer, why I feel that is an accurate statement, is that this site does operate differently than most schools because of 2 main features. One, it does not operate on a bell schedule, meaning that this is not every student needs to arrive at 8:05 on the dot or 8:15 on the dot. Students arrive, or children arrive, when their parents drop them off, and you'll see later on, based on the data we collected at the Berkeley Heights site and the Mountainside sites, that the parents drop them off at basically spread out throughout the morning and pick them up spread out throughout the afternoon. The other thing that separates this site from, I would say, most schools is that the pickup period is much later in the afternoon, where most schools see that pickup period 2:45, 3:15, 3:30, that type of time period. Most of the students for this site actually get picked up at around the 5 to 6 o'clock hour. So again, it's a little outside of what you see as a significant peak or that school time dismissal peak that exists on Morris Avenue. So we basically kind of hold our students in a little bit more. And again, I don't want to get too into the engineering weeds here, but I think that the way that this site operates is actually similar to more of a retention basin. When you get a big rainstorm, what the nearby schools get is they get all the rain, basically all the students come to the site all at once. You get this huge deluge of students all at once. This site gets the students, it's spread out a little bit more, so the peaks are not quite as high as what you'd experience from most schools. The second piece that I think, or the other piece that is a different function, is that all the students get walked into the site. So this is not a location where you'll have parents snaking the parking lot, waiting for little Johnny or little Jenny to be brought out to them in their car. They park into the parking spot, they walk into the building, and then they walk out with their child. And when they're dropping their child off, they get out of their car with their child, they bring them into the building, and then they walk back to their car. So you do not have the queues that may snake around some schools or some neighborhoods that you may get during the, I'd say, a little older children drop off and pick up that you may see at schools. So again, that was one of the things that was mentioned, I think, earlier on. I just wanted to kind of get that on the record of how this site may operate differently than most schools. The other thing that I want to talk about is that we investigated again how the driveway access points would operate, and they tend to operate at acceptable levels of service. Now, I know because I've listened to the hearings, I've been in this corridor, I know that it's difficult to make left turns onto Morris Avenue. If you're on Gates and you want to make a left turn in the morning, it is difficult. If you're on Webster Avenue, you want to make a left turn in the morning, it is difficult. When I get to my planning presentation, and you'll hear it later on, one of the benefits, or one of the aspects of this application is that this is a permitted use. This is a use that is contemplated for this type of site in this zone. Buildings along Morris Avenue, such as this one, can have and have been thought about from a city council perspective, that a daycare use is appropriate here. So the traffic that comes along with the daycare use has been deemed acceptable from the governing body as part of the zoning plan that has been put in place. So when it comes to the effects of offsite traffic, what I'm typically looking at from a traffic engineer's perspective is Are there safe movements? Is it safe? Can you make a left turn safely from Gates Avenue onto Morris Avenue? What I look at is I look to see, do you have proper lines of sight? Can you see when you're stopped at that stop line? Can you look left? Can you look right? And can you make an appropriate judgment to turn onto the roadway safely? And I believe that is the case today, and that is the case in the future with this proposed development. In addition, there are some modeling aspects that if we were in a non-pandemic time period, there is some studies that I would have performed out here looking at how many gaps there are in traffic for certain left turns to get a better level of understanding of how long the queue may be on Gates Avenue to get out onto Morris Avenue. But again, when we're looking at the amount of traffic we're adding to the roadway network, we're looking at approximately one to 1.5 new cars leaving the site or coming to the site in the busiest rush hour time period. So if you live on Gates Avenue today and you're driving you leave in the morning to get onto Morris Avenue, there'll be one new car coming out of the site about every minute. So you may not catch that car on Monday, on Tuesday, maybe on Wednesday. There's one more car in front of you when you're waiting to make your turn out onto Morris Avenue. But again, I stress that this is a permitted use, and you'll hear some significant testimony from me later on during the planning discussions about what that means in terms of judging the traffic impacts of a site such as this. I'm going to now roll into the parking and drop off and pickup discussions, because I do think this is one aspect of the application that has been, I think, very, very well calculated in terms of how we've designed the site. And I want to explain to the board and the public in terms of how drop off and pickup works for a site such as this. So what we've done is we've looked at from the other two sites, the Berkeley Heights site and the Mountainside site, what the frequency that parents arrive. And we wanted to get an understanding of how comfortable are we providing enough parking spaces for your worst case drop off and pickup at a site such as this. So we actually dug deep into our statistics books that we studied in college, and we did a Poisson distribution, which based on this, it allows us to look at the probability of a certain amount of events happening in a specific period of time. So what we were able to do is we were able to be 95% confident that the maximum number of drop-off and pickups that would occur at any one time at a site like this, based on the data of Mountainside and based on the data of Berkeley Heights, is that you would have at the most 12 students or 12 parents dropping off or picking up at any one time. So the maximum amount that we would expect being parked at one time from a parent point of view is 12. And just operationally, in looking at the specific data from Berkeley Heights and Mountainside, we actually never saw anything more than 11. But using this Poisson distribution, again, wanting to get this confidence interval, we grew our numbers and said, okay, we'll design this site assuming that 12 parents need to drop off at any one time. So what we'd expect is that we would have the 9 parking spaces located closest to the building, or located, I guess, in the rear of the building, in addition to another 3 parking spaces along the rear property line, and they will be signed specifically for parent and drop-off and pickup only between the typical peak hours for drop-off and pickup. So that would be between 7 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., perhaps 9 a.m. And then in the afternoon, it would be between 4:30 and 6:30. That those parking spaces will be utilized solely by parents dropping off and picking up their children. We like these parking spaces because the majority of them have direct access right into the building. No need to walk through any parking fields. In addition, the last 3 parking spaces that we've designated here at the back left corner when looking at this Exhibit A7. Again, this is the least activity you'd see on the site in terms of any type of vehicular traffic. So those parking spaces be reserved for the drop-off and pickup operations for parents. Another aspect of the Primrose operation is that this is not like a school in the sense that all the teachers at a school, or at least the vast majority of the teachers of a school, arrive all at the same time, likely before any of the students get there to basically receive the students. That is not what happens at a Primrose or even most daycare facilities. The employees actually arrive and they peak in the middle of the day, and then they start going down in number subsequent to about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So what you see, and I have a couple exhibits later on to show this, but what you see is the employee number starts low, goes high in middle of the day, and then back down as the students start leaving. And the parents basically peak on the two ends of that. They arrive with their students on the two ends of it. So you do not have simultaneous peaks, so that the parking spaces that were designated for student drop-off only or child drop-off only can be utilized by the employees when they are there in the middle of the day. So that is one of the key aspects for how a Primrose site typically operates. The last aspect of the parking demand of this site was the office use. And again, there is an existing second floor office of a little over 6,000 square feet in the existing building. There's been testimony provided that half of that building, half of that second floor will be utilized by Primrose kind of as a breakout room. And again, if there's more testimony that's necessary that I can't give, Mr. Taylor will certainly give it after I finish my testimony. But the idea is that that is basically a breakout room, a training room, an additional indoor space that it could be necessary for some of the staff to utilize. So again, half of the 6,000 square feet on the second floor is basically part of the childcare facility, but will not be utilized to have an additional classroom. It's not going to be additional classroom space. So basically generates no significant or no additional parking, because it's basically just additional breakout space for the daycare building. The remaining about 3,000 square feet is an office use, and those office tenants will be utilizing the parking spaces within the parking field. I think it is probably best for them to be designated about the 6 parking spaces located as you enter the site along Morris Avenue for their uses, for them and their guests. And to determine what was the appropriate amount of parking for those employees, we utilized the Institute of Transportation Engineers Parking Generation Manual, which we look specifically at office uses generally in the range of 3,000 to 10,000 square feet to determine how many employees and how many guests would a office of that size have during their peak time periods. And so we felt that about 5 to 6 parking spaces is what is necessary for that use. And we believe that having those first parking spaces for them is the most ideal location. So again, that was based on the ITE. All the other data utilized within this study was either based on data collected from the DOT or other traffic studies performed along Morris Avenue, or specific data from the Berkeley Heights and Mountainside Primrose sites that are in operation. So I just want to bring up, and I don't know if this needs to be marked as a separate exhibit, but in our, trying to find it here under the, here we go. In our traffic impact study, we did include a figure, and I wanted to show the board how the parking will generally work. So,
and just, let me, if I may, the report is on the town's website or the planning board's website for this application. And just so I'm clear, Mr. Steckler, is this in the traffic impact statement or the updated one?
This is in the traffic impact study. It was dated September 11th, 2020.
Okay, so I think that would have been the updated one.
Yes. And it is the last page in that I'd like to.
That's actually the earlier one, the September 11, not the updated, and it's the last page, A22, is that?
No, it is the update. It is the updated one.
Hold on, let me, if I click on updated statement 2, hold on. So updated statement 2 is a comment response letter and then some additional exhibits and figures. There's some crossover between the two, so I may bounce back and forth, but for the purposes of what I'm looking to show, it is titled on the planning board page I believe, updated traffic impact statement. And I think I'm sharing my webpage, but it is this one here that I'm showing first.
And what's the date of that, please?
It is September 11, 2020.
Okay. By updated, I was referring to the October 15, but that was a responsive document. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
So we are, for all intents and purposes, it's a September 11, 2020 traffic impact study, albeit updated from something earlier than that. And it's
Yes.
page 822.
It is page A22, the last page in your book.
Okay.
I guess,
Um,
Mr.
and-
Warner, do we want to?
You don't need to mark it. It's as long as it's properly identified.
Part of the record.
It's an exhibit on the that was submitted well more than 10 days in advance of this evening, need not be marked as an exhibit.
Right. And I want to explain how this graph works, but the one thing I want to caveat is that this graph is before the client decided that the office space on the second floor would be half utilized as their breakout space. So the office numbers in here are about twice as high as what I would say the updated version of this would be. And we do have this in more of a numerical form that is in that updated submission. And I could share that as well, just so you could see it in a graphical form and then in a numerical form. But generally, the way this page, what this page attempts to show is as the hours of the day along the bottom of the sheet. So on the x-axis, if I remember my high school math, is time from 6:30 in the morning through 6:30 in the afternoon, which is the hours of the Primrose operation. On the left-hand side, you have the parking space demand. And so that we basically tabled every 15 minutes what the amount of parked cars would be within the lot. The various colors relate to the different users of the site. The blue lines reflect the Primrose staff. And I'll call it a red or orange red line, is the parent cars. And the green line is the second floor office parking demand. So what you see and being able to read this from the morning is at 6:30 in the morning, you have, I believe, about four Primrose staff. You may have about 6 parents dropping off and maybe 1 person at the office building. And this ratio, the way that the students and staff arrive, is based on how Primrose operates at Mountainside and Berkeley Heights, which is how they intend to operate here. The office building is based on the ITE. So that is based on the industry standard for an office building. I know my office tends to work very late. We probably would be a little higher under non-COVID times in the end of the day here. But again, this is your standard kind of office distribution of parking. So what you see here in the morning, overall parking demand starts low. And you could see that the parent drop off, the red lines get to be a peak. They get to be quite large at 7:30, 7:45, 8 o'clock, basically up to about 9 o'clock. And then the parent numbers kind of drop off. You may have 1 parent dropping off. And again, this is based on being the 95% confidence interval. So this is basically 95% of the time, this is the worst case scenario that you would see. So again, you may have a parent drop off in the middle of the day. Perhaps their child had a dentist appointment, they're coming there later, or perhaps they decided to enroll their child in a sport in the morning and they're only using the Primrose for the afternoon hours or for part of the day. And that's the flexibility that Primrose allows, as opposed to a standard school, a kindergarten, a first grade. So again, in the middle of the day, you see those red numbers getting very low. And then in the afternoon, when the parents start picking up, you see those numbers climb a bit. The blue, that is the Primrose staff, again, starts low. You see that peak in middle of the day, and then it starts going down. So you could see that as the students start getting picked up in the afternoon, the staff are already, a number of them have already left for the day. So it allows for the parking field to be operated at an optimal level, as opposed to providing the total number of parking for the employees at their peak, the total number of parking for the parents at their peak, and the total number of parking for the office at their peak. If you took all the peaks, you'd have parking spaces that wouldn't be utilized at any point of the day. So we believe this is the efficient model. This is known as shared parking. It's recognized by Summit. It's recognized by a lot of urban and downtown areas as the most efficient way to design parking, is to go with this shared model. And what you basically do is you chart these peaks, and you find out when the ultimate peak is. And in this case, the ultimate peak back when we were utilizing the entire office for outside office space was 39 parked cars. I'm now going to jump over, now that you've seen it in a graphical form, to this was the titled Updated Traffic Statement 2 on the website. It is the submission that was dated October 15th for the record. And I will scroll down to the 4th page of the letter. And this is the numbers in a table form. And this is with the corrected office parking demand. So this is with the parking demand looking specifically at only half of the office space being utilized by outside office users and the other half being utilized by Primrose for just extra space, storage, breakout, training type rooms. So what you see is, again, you see the numerical values for parents drop off and pick up. They get high in the morning, they start going down in the middle of the day, and they pick up again in the afternoon. The employees for the Primrose, low in the morning, get to be high, peak in the middle of the day, back down, and office low at the beginning, high in the middle of the day, low as you get later in the day, with a peak parking demand of 34 park spaces. So we believe that based on how Primrose operates, that we could satisfy the parking demand for the Primrose and the office building with 34 parking spaces. And now I'll go over to the design plan, or actually you've seen the design plan, but we have a total of 40 parking spaces on site. So we believe that in providing 34 parking spaces, 40 parking spaces, we could satisfy this 34 parking space demand, and then have a little extra elbow room in case a couple more parents decide to pick up at once, or that the office user on this site maybe has a few more visitors than what we had expected in the middle of the day. But we basically have that additional supply well beyond what we expect to be the peak parking demand. So that is how we expect the parking to operate for this proposed development.
Mr. Chairman, could I jump in with one quick question?
Sure.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry for answering.
Thank you. That's okay. I appreciate the witness's permission and the chairman's. Thank you. The two things. One, you have a 10% buffer there, and you still make it according to your report at 38. That would take you to a 10% buffer on the 34 would take you to 37. Frankly, it might take you to 38, rounding up. But
yep.
You have that 10% buffer. You said, though, there's 40 parking spaces, and I'm not keeping perfect track, but I thought we lost at least one space.
You know what?
So you may want to double check that statement.
Let me do a quick count on the plan here. They were moving numbers. Let me quickly zoom in on it. We are at 40. We gained a space, and I'll flip back to A7 if I could find it here on the screen. We gained a space with this new parking alignment, but then we lost a space when we lost the parking space closest to Morris Avenue. So we ended up at 40. And let me do the math so I feel comfortable. 3 plus 7 is 10, plus 9 is 19, plus another 9 is 28, plus 12 is 40. So I believe we're at 40.
I thought you also lost one with the hatched area, but nevertheless, you got 40, you got 40. Okay, thank you.
We crowbarred ourselves into 40. We as part of the realignment. So
yeah, if you recall, that area, Mr. Warner, was like a completely different layout of where cars actually would pull in closer to the building. So the hatched area was never, counted as a spot.
So so again, I guess from a traffic point of view, again, what we did as part of this project is we went through hours and hours and hours of real life data. And I know there's a lot of projects that I work on that I wish I had the ability to really dig into the books and see how these sites specifically operate, ideally before pandemic. And we were able to do that for this site. We were able to look at, data from January and February over multiple days at 2 different sites in nearby communities to get an understanding of how Primrose operates, because it is somewhat unique. Again, it is not the daycares of when I was going to school. It is not a kindergarten class like it is in the public school district, or maybe even a private school district. It operates in a specific way, and we were able to take that data and mine it and get an understanding for how many people we expect to come in an hour, when are they coming throughout the day, how many people are going to be parking on site. And we took all that data and really, I think, we're able to provide a traffic study that allows us to understand really how the site operates from an on-site circulation standpoint. Again, from the roadway standpoint, I can state that the driveways will operate efficiently. The proper sight lines coming in and out. I think the improvement by eliminating the existing parking space closest to Morris Avenue, I think is a huge improvement. Eliminating the 2 parking spaces on Webster Avenue, I think is an improvement. Again, right now, or when the office building was in full use, you'd have traffic coming in and out along Webster Avenue. We've eliminated that. We've closed off those driveways, put that sidewalk back, rebuilt the sidewalk around, and really look to, focus our access only in one spot. We do need to, unfortunately, get in and out of a site. We are building a site that has an existing structure on it that we're working around. And I think that we've designed it so that the site access points are safe and efficient for this type of use.
And let's make sure I'm not muted. Mr. Seckler, I do know there's some questions at the prior meeting, and I think it was also in the board engineer's updated review letter. There's some questions as to deliveries in internal circulation that way, as well as refuse with the new dumpster area. And I believe there's also a question about the truck turning template and how it can maneuver, how it maneuvered this new layout. You can maybe address those as well.
Yes, and again, as part of this development, this is a site that it does not see a significant amount of delivery traffic. In terms of food, and I guess I could get into a little of the on-site operations where it relates to traffic. They get about 1 food delivery a week. They do have a warming kitchen in the site. I believe you saw that as part of the floor plan. So that vehicle, it's not a tractor trailer. It's like in between a van and a single unit truck. Arrives during off-peak hours. Would likely park, unload in less than 15-20 minutes, and then egress the site. And again, we are providing an egress route that is acceptable for single unit trucks or even the fire truck to enter the site and exit the site via Gates Avenue. Enter the site from Morris and egress via Gates Avenue. In terms of other deliveries, it's really no different than a standard kind of office building. You may get a FedEx or a UPS delivery to this site. Again, this is a site that we believe, considering that there's pretty low turnover activity on the site during the middle of the day, that any of those type of deliveries can operate on this site, load and unload from any of the drive aisles, or perhaps utilize parts of the hatched areas that we have here, or on the edge of the parking field closest to the drop-off pickup. We think that the infrequent amount of deliveries, again, that once a week delivery for food, they could be accommodated similar to the other users in the area. Again, I wouldn't put it past perhaps UPS. They may even just park on Morris if there's an empty parking spot and just walk themselves in and may hit up a couple spots with one parking maneuver. In terms of refuse, you'd have the garbage truck enter. The garbage bins would be loaded into the back of the truck, and the garbage truck would exit. So we actually are able to accommodate this with basically really no backing maneuver. Again, I think that the applicant is willing to stipulate to when those garbage pickups will occur. It is a private hauler, so again, this is not something we're looking to occur in the overnight hours. We would like to stay away from your standard, AM and PM peak for the daycare. So, we would, anything after 10 o'clock in the morning up until, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe even the kind of 6:30 to 9 o'clock hour tends to be a good time period for how Primrose gets their trash pickups. So again, I think that could be accommodated on site.
I guess at this point, we presented the testimony on, the traffic, and you had an opportunity to review the updated board professional review letters in connection with the application.
Yes, I have.
And now, in addition, for instance, I would note, I don't know if we need to go through each one of them. Mr. Warner, I know we went through a lot of these review letters already. Some were updated, though it wasn't necessarily clear where they were updated. I know in the zoning officer review letter, there was a question as to the wall sconces on Morris Avenue. I believe we had prior testimony from the architect that we would comply with the 15-foot height requirement. But I was going to highlight in the board engineer review letter a couple questions or comments, or if you want, we can open up to the board to ask questions on Mr. Seckler's testimony, and the board professionals can ask him in case they felt there was anything not addressed. There was direct testimony from their review letter.
Mr. Giannetti, so we would be asking questions, Mr. Seckler, both from a planning perspective and from a traffic perspective at this point?
No, I think it would just be traffic and
Traffic, okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I guess there's a couple of questions procedurally, all of which are within your discretion. But one is, do we have questioning of Mr. Seckler as to the traffic separate and apart from his testimony as to planning? Another is, do we have him go through very quickly all the reports that were updated, including our engineer's traffic impact review #2, which came after his second of his reports, and to make sure they're covered. Candidly, I think if there's a way in which he can quickly go through all the reports, that might be beneficial to everyone, might answer a lot of the questions that the board members and board professionals have and the public has, and it certainly would help me as the scrivener of a resolution, because whether this is granted or denied, there's going to be a resolution to be memorialized as to the proceedings. So maybe with your permission, Mr. Chairman, he can, with Mr. Giannetti's help, run through the updated reports, all of which were submitted as a package in the November 19 or thereabouts range.
I think that'd be helpful, and I think it's very efficient. So let's do that, Mr. Giannetti. Thanks.
Sure. Now, Mr. Seckler, you received the updated series of reports in connection with this application from the various borough or township.
We're a city, Mr. Giannetti.
I know. I was going to say the city, then I got nervous for a second. But the city outside officials and review commissions with respect to their updated reports, starting with the zoning officer's report dated November 19th, 2020.
Pulling it up here on the screen. Okay, I got that one up there.
Now, I don't believe there, I mean, variances that you honestly identify or address in your planning testimony, but I don't believe there was any comments with respect to traffic or even the revised plans per se.
Correct. I think the only thing they mentioned is the variance that we're requesting for parking, and I think I spoke a lot of words in a short period of time about the parking demand.
Sure. And also there was a comment about the height of the wall sconces on and the lights on Morris Avenue, and just confirm as a testimony of our architect that the wall sconces will comply with the 15-foot height requirement.
That is correct. That is correct.
So then moving to the next 2020 from the fire chief, and did he have any further comments on the application?
Fire chief said no further comments, built to code or build to code. I don't know if that was a instruction or a confirmation.
Sure. And then there was a November 17th, 2020 review letter from the board engineer review letter #2. And in that review letter, a lot of it was noting either testimony that was to be provided or just confirming the responses to, or commenting on the responses to the revised plans you submitted. Going to page, let's see, page 3 of 8, there was a comment on the traffic and operations, and you addressed a lot of the testimony on your direct into the questions he was
Mr.
looking for.
Giannetti, can you give the number of the comment when you get there for each one,
Sure.
please?
Yeah, it's page 3, comment 10.
And that bleeds into the next page with a bunch of bullet points. So I'm going to go
Correct.
through each one of them to make sure that the testimony was given, or again, I'll state that I gave significant testimony about that. The first one was regarding whether we've reached out to the city or county regarding traffic counts. We did reach out to the board's planners to see what they had on file for this application. That's how we got the Celgene traffic study. We did reach out to the county. They did not indicate they had any counts for that area. The second bullet point on page 4, comment 10, indicated about trip credits for internal captures, public transit. What we've done in terms of our analysis is we've assumed that every employee drives and every parent drives. Again, there is ratios that we utilize based on the Mountainside and the Berkeley Heights site in terms of the number of, I wouldn't call it carpool, but the number of siblings or people that kind of came in the same car that we could tell from the data. But we did not account for the fact that perhaps someone who works in the office may also have their kid in daycare. So they're really only arriving to the site once and only parking their car once. They're not dropping their child off as a trip and then also driving separately to the office. It's a singular trip. So that was, we did not take any type of credit like that. There are a number of daycare uses within kind of office parks or office buildings where you do, I mean, that's a main draw of the childcare is the fact that it's near places of employment. So you don't have to drive out of your way for it. So we did not take that credit. In addition, there is a bus stop obviously right in front of the site. I think it's the 70 route right in front of the site. We did not take any credit for bus transportation. Primrose, depending on the site, can get a significant portion of their employees that would take the bus. But we did not assume any credit. We assumed that all 28 employees would be driving and parking on the site. Lastly, that we did not necessarily take credit for in our analysis is the fact that this may be a pass-by type use for some parents. There may be some parents that choose this daycare facility because it's on their way to another trip that they were going to make along Morris Avenue. So whether they commute along Morris Avenue to get to their job and they decide to stop here on the way, or they may have a child at at Washington, and they may decide that, hey, listen, I'm going to pick this daycare because it's right nearby. It's the same trip. I could sit in the traffic once and be done with it. That is not adding new traffic to the roadway. It's basically the same car that we would have counted in our traffic counts would have been basically going to the site. It wouldn't be a new person coming to this area. So that is also something that was not accounted for in our study, which means that our analysis is likely a little more conservative. Last one, the next one, the third bullet point is related to parking spaces for drop off and pickup located near the building entrance, does not identify those spaces, reserve timing. On the record, and again, I'll point to on, I believe this is A7, we would designate the 9 parking spaces that are closest to the building along the long drive aisle as drop off and pickup. And I'm going to say between 6:30 and 9:30 for students, and then the 3 parking spaces at the end of the dead end aisle also for that feature. So that would be 12 parking spaces dedicated with signage for that function. The applicant shall provide testimony regarding the estimated duration of drop off and pickup process. What we're typically seeing is about, I'm going to say on average, 5 minutes is the drop off pickup from when the parent pulls into the parking space to when they get out of the parking space. There's some variation. Usually in the morning, it's a slightly, maybe 4 minutes. In the evening, it may be more of the 6 to 7 minutes, just because of the way that it's easier to, I guess, drop your child off than pick them up. You want to ask the teacher what's going on with the day. But that was built into the model that we had in terms of determining the number of parents that are dropping off at any one period of time. I'd also state that right now, Primrose, with their COVID policy, does not have anywhere close to that level of timing for their drop off and pickup. Their drop off and pickup is much faster now. Again, because of COVID reasons, they want to move that process along faster. And perhaps that's something that may be utilized in the future going forward with Primrose as a policy. But we based our analysis based on the pre-COVID policy and the pre-COVID characteristics. The next one relates to the ordinance for parking. Again, I think I gave some significant testimony regarding why we expect the parking demand to be the way it is. One of the things I wanted to discuss in there is related to the office building number. Now, the ITE is, it's the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It publishes a parking generation manual where they basically compile a lot of data about parking. And they basically they will study sites, office buildings, and determine how many cars are parked there, how big is the office building, and they come up with ratios for, based on how big your office building, how much parking you would expect to have. Now, the issue with using the IT and just pulling the numbers out of the book is that it doesn't always fit every situation. For instance, the average, if you just pulled it right out of the book, the average size of the office building within the IT manual is 145,000 square feet. Obviously, an office building with 145,000 square feet may have a very different operational, characteristics than smaller office buildings or more neighborhood office buildings. The hours that they peak may be different. The number of visitors they get may be different. Even the way the square footage is utilized may be different. So what we did is we took the IT numbers for office buildings between 3,000 and 10,000 square feet to kind of really narrow down the number of the characteristics of what we expect this office building to generate in terms of the amount of parking. So that, again, was, I just want to reiterate that we didn't just pull a number out of the IT and said it's so. We basically filtered it down the data to fit this specific situation. Next one is, the next bullet point is about, based on a review of other daycares of similar size. Again, I think I've given specific testimony about the other daycare sites. The other daycare sites are approximately the same size, give or take a couple percent. Same thing with their enrollment. Both of them were at full enrollment. And I think that the numbers were around the 200 student enrollment number for both Berkeley Heights and Mountainside. And the data that we collected was from January and February, which the applicant has told me is their busier months in terms of their enrollment time period. So we believe that the data from those two locations in January, February represent a proper comparison to what you'd expect here when this is fully built out and operational. I guess the next bullet point was related to, I think, an earlier comment in maybe our first traffic study before we had all the Primrose data. Was just about, being in an area where you have an office building, there may be some crossover between office tenants and users of the daycare in terms of their children being put into the daycare in that building, and that's a benefit from a traffic point of view. In terms of designated parking spaces, I think I've discussed that. And the last bullet point there, available parking in residential streets. No, we do not anticipate our employees to utilize any parking on residential streets. In fact, the residential streets generally have some parking prohibitions or limits in terms of 2-hour parking during certain time periods or no parking permitted at all. So really it wouldn't work well for our employees. And again, I don't think it's close or convenient for the parents either to be parking on the residential streets. So I don't see us spilling onto any of the nearby residential streets. So that would be my answer to number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Sackler. And with respect to item 11, though it's engineering kind of a comment. It says the applicant has indicated they will provide testimony. It deals with the building coverage calculation, but I'm not sure exactly if there was a question or just testimony as to
Yeah,
what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll provide testimony. I don't want to speak for for Chris there, but I think, I imagine I'll be giving planning testimony, recognizing the fact that we need a variance and explaining the justification for it.
Sure. The next one where it noted certain testimony is item number 17 on page 5, or starts on page 5 and goes into page 6, concerning the new fence and that buffer along the property owner or along the southerly properties. And I believe you addressed that. Is there anything else you want to add with respect to that testimony?
No, I think that's been properly testified to.
Then comment 19.
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to double check to just so the board is aware, it does say that in the comment, is that the solid fence will only be facing lot 23, and that facing the parking lot and facing Webster Avenue is going to be a decorative fence, like a wrought iron type fence.
That is correct.
Okay. That was it.
Again, unless the board wants otherwise, but we felt that, you want the aesthetics on the roadways and the noise protection facing the residents. We felt that was the best balance.
Okay, the next comment is comment 19 on page 6 of 8 about the updated rendering that was provided and you provided testimony on this evening.
Correct.
Comment 20, you addressed the truck turning template. He notes that the plans indicate that there's only one area where there is a constricted turning movement with one of the parking islands. The applicant should provide testimony. If you can address that.
Let's see.
It's where the dumpster was going to be located.
Okay. If we need to cut that back a little bit, I think maybe there was a piece of this. Maybe we might have to change the angle of this planting area, but I think we could make it work with fairly easy circulation. Again, in worst case, a vehicle could back up slightly and realign themselves, but we'd be happy to make that minor change to prevent that from being necessary.
Okay.
And then comment 21, you provided testimony as to the deliveries and how that would work in the loading. I guess there's also coming on event parking. I'm not sure if you're aware of any events that are.
Not that I'm aware of specifically. Again, I know that obviously Mr. Taylor's here and could provide that information in terms of any event parking that would be needed.
Sure. And then comment 22 was with respect to the site distances and whether you confirm that the selected site distances were appropriate.
I believe that they are based on the ordinance. But again, if there's a need to change it in terms of the way it's calculated on the plan, we'd be happy to. But I note that, again, from having done field observations out there, we do have a proper site distance in that location.
And then I believe the rest of the comments were just either noting that we addressed it through testimony and or just a comment going forward with respect to kind of the plans and the site plan. Well, let Mr. DeVore speak for himself.
I think you've addressed everything.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I was just going to ask if Mr. Giannetti, on behalf of the applicant, is stipulating as a condition of approval of the balance of the items listed in Mr. Doerr's November 17, 2020 report. There's a half a dozen or so conditions there. Unless we're told otherwise, the board's constrained to assume that these are all conditions stipulated to by the applicant. Is that accurate for the board to assume that, Mr. Giannetti?
Yes.
Well, that would be
Thank you.
item 23 through item 33 or whatever.
Thereabouts, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay, then the next, Mr. Seckler, and I think we addressed this at the prior meeting with respect to the construction official. And there was no new comment to the revised plans. Same the city forester dated November 13th, 2020, indicating the landscape plan is revised is acceptable.
Yes.
And next, there's a comment from the health department, November 19th, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's exactly dated, but November 18th. And I think it indicated that the interior plans, I think, need to be submitted for approval.
Are you looking at health department? Which one are you looking at?
Yes, the health department.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to read the scanned writing, but it did look like it say allows for something about interior needs to be submitted for health department approval, and we would agree that's part of our licensing requirement.
The word looks like plans to me, PLANS.
Okay. Gotcha. Yes, so we're in agreement with that.
Sure. And then the next comment is from the Historic Preservation Commission, which probably best it doesn't really relate to traffic, but it's more as to the look and maybe better addressed through your planning testimony.
Correct. And again, I think that would definitely be better for planning testimony. I think, again, you've seen the images from the architect, so we would utilize that as part of our planning testimony.
Okay.
Sure. And I guess same with the board planners review letter. There was one comment at the very beginning on the top of page 2 concerning the designation of parking areas, which you addressed. And you'll touch on this again as we go through your planning testimony. So unless Mr. Warner has anything or any of the other board professionals as to the review letters, we'd be happy to take questions related to traffic or the revised plans to Mr. Seckler, and then he can move into his planning testimony.
Mr. Chairman, before we do that, if I may, I think there were still a couple of more reports in the package of reports after the planner's report.
Yeah, the Environmental Commission.
I'm sorry, yes.
Exactly. And there's also the traffic impact review number 2 from our engineer that if with the board chairman's permission, we just want to make sure that that's been covered in its entirety.
Yeah, Mr. Seckler, I think, can testify. He had the second updated report that was submitted, I think, October. Mr. Seckler, if you have the date, I think it was October 15th, maybe.
Yes, yes.
Addressed it point by point.
Well, but there was, if I may, Mr. Giannetti, there was an October 23 thereafter traffic impact review number 2 by Mr. Dare, our engineer. Maybe we can address the Environmental Commission's report and then the traffic impact review number 2 of October 23 in that order.
Yep, I think that works.
Sure, I
That's
think
being our council.
Yeah, that's fine. And I guess we want to address the Environmental Commission, which I think we touched on with the civil engineer, but he's provided an additional comment as to the landscaping.
Yeah, and again, I guess this is, we're talking about the Environmental Commission comments.
Yes, dated November 19th, 2020.
Yeah, so again, it looked like that there was some discussion at the top about impervious coverage, buffer zones, things of that nature, which obviously we'll address, although it seems like the Environmental Commission has no objection to it, but because of the use that we're proposing. But there are 2 points. One was related to the traffic report and the peak uses of drop off and pickup. Again, I think I tried to explain that it is not necessarily when the building is seeing its peak parking demand that the employees and the office use kind of fit right in the middle of the 2 peaks of the daycare. And then the second comment was related to, and it looked like there was some appreciation for having a planned schedule that was almost acceptable, but we'd be happy to continue to work with them to switch out whatever last species are not favorable and replace them with ones that are. So we have no problem complying with that as well. And then it looked like there was a new question about some of the species that they deemed as non-native. And again, we agree that we would be happy to work with them on with identifying the species that they'd like to see.
And Mr. Dower's October 23
Yes.
traffic impact review number 2.
So I'm pulling that one up. So that one, comment 1. So again, the issue that we have with providing analysis at Morris Ave and Gates Ave is obviously the pandemic. And again, any analysis that we provide is really not going to be indicative of current conditions and will not allow us to do certain things like performing a gap study and getting an understanding of the true queuing on the side streets. So that was why we did not include that analysis. The second comment looks like it's been satisfied. The third one, turning maneuvers. Okay, so this was
Mr. Seckler, is it possible to bring it up on screen only
Yes.
For the benefit of the public and the
can.
board members if they don't have it handy?
It should be before you now.
That's it.
Okay. So again, the first comment was about analysis at the intersection of Gates and Morris. And again, I think I've given my explanation why I can't give a full analysis look at it with the pandemic volumes. The second comment, as I said, was just a statement about what we had performed with the other Primrose sites. The third one is talking about the spaces closest to Morris Avenue, the turnover of those spaces. I think that you've heard this review letter, I think, came before the redesign of the plans where we've eliminated the parking space closest to Morris Avenue. So we believe that it's an improvement. We eliminated one of the spaces. I think that it is sufficient. Again, if the board, and again, we're in a variant situation here. So if the board wants to eliminate a second space from the area closest to Morris Avenue, I would, and they feel that we have sufficient parking based on our demand that we could lose one, I'm fine with that. But I wanted to put that in the board's hands as they could balance, the variance we're requesting for and this comment made by the board engineer. The next one is related to the flex space. And again, I think we could state on the record, and I believe that this is a building and a use that gets licensed by the state. So I think we can state on the record that we are not utilizing the additional square footage for any type of classroom space, that our student capacity will be what was shown on the plans in terms of what is permitted as part of what we are aiming for in terms of the proposed capacity, which I believe is 200 children at this site.
And at the last meeting, we agreed to, during public questioning of the architect, we agreed that we would be limited to that as a condition, 200 students.
And again, the subsequent to that, we believe that we now have that 10% buffer because we've eliminated half of the office parking demand. So that kind of leads into number 5, where with the 10% buffer, I think board council, I think the number was either 38 or 37, or depending on how you rounded it, and we have 40 on site. So I think we meet that. And number 6, strongly recommending the 3 parallel spaces closest to the Gates Avenue exit be restricted to employee parking. We have no issue with that, and we now show the indication of a sign, and we would comply with that comment.
Mr. Chairman, I think they've answered all the questions in those letters. So I have no further questions on the traffic.
Well, Chris, I guess we're slightly out of order here with regard to asking the board versus the board professionals to speak up. But since we're in the realm of board professionals, maybe we can stay there. But we're really just dealing not with planning. So I don't think anyone other than you, Chris, would be appropriate at this time for traffic. And so I think it's time to move on from there and ask the board members if they have any questions. And once the board's members are through asking questions, we can then ask, the public can ask questions of this testimony.
Well, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think it might be best if when he gets, after getting some questions from the board as to the traffic and the revised changes, Mr. Seckler can then get into the planning testimony as well. And then after completing that, he can get opened up to the public on either anything he testified.
That makes sense. That's a little more efficient. Good suggestion there. All right. So members of the board, any questions with regard to traffic at this point? Sticking strictly with traffic. And I know it's sometimes it's better for me to just call on various board members using the list that we have, just because it's a little hard for me to see everybody at this place. So maybe I'll just start with a list and say, Ms. Bolson Alvarez, would you have a question for Mr. Seckler?
Yes. When I was looking at the chart that explained when people arrive, the office people and the parents with children and the staff, I was wondering, when the children are so young, infant to 4 years old, how is it that the staff isn't all there when they arrive?
And I guess, this is partially operational question, but partially just in seeing how these work, is that you don't necessarily, by each age group, you don't necessarily, you have multiple classrooms that are preschool classrooms and multiple classrooms that are young infants classrooms. You will not need all 3 or 4 of them when the first student or 2 students or 3 students arrive. So you basically start out with all of the, students will be centered in one room with one teacher. And then when you get to the point where there's enough students that arrive that you need the second room, that's when the second room would be opened up with an additional teacher. And again, the one good thing is these tend to operate pretty regularly. So as the site gets in operation, again, the day you open, you don't enroll 180 kids, you kind of enroll over time. You'll get a feeling for, what time specific students tend to arrive or what time their students arrive, because they chart it with the check-in, check-out periods. They know, is this an early arriving crowd where you need to get more staff there for the 7:15 because parents are taking the train, or is this an 8 o'clock because this is, most people are driving and they're getting to their offices a little bit later in the day. So again, that's at least what I've seen. I can't speak specifically, from the inside of the building, but that's how I believe it operates in terms of not needing all your teachers there at once.
Okay, I have another question about that. When I was looking at your, now I can see my screenshot, but I haven't been able to look at it since the numeric graph and your other graph that was just visual. I was quickly trying to add up how many cars, your parent cars, that you were actually trying to represent there. And it looked numerically that it was roughly 50 cars when you in the chart, and maybe I read it wrong. And in the visual, it looked like maybe 100. So are you assuming, and it sounded like you aren't assuming this when you spoke to some of the other issues, but it looked like there were only 100 cars at most in your graphic of parent cars coming in when there are 200 potential students and only 50 on the numeric one. So how does that work?
So I'm not sure what you're referring to in terms of the adding up, but I could give you a different number that I hope helps explain this.
Okay, well, you know what? Just do me a favor and bring up because
Sure.
I can share my screen probably and show it because I did a screenshot, but your chart with the numbers per hour was
Yep.
the numeric version, and prior to that you did so how many parent cars are dropping off in the morning?
Yep. So I'm going to give you, I'll tell you why you can't just add up these numbers in a second. So this is the highest number you would expect at this time period. So there may be a time period where there's 8 parents and a time period, in between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. And those parents would have been in and out of here. So you can't just add up this column. But what I can tell you is within the traffic study itself on page 6, we illustrate the peak hour trip generation as it relates to student drop off and pickup. And we expect during the busiest hour in the morning, you'd have 74 parents dropping off. Now, again, what that represents is that's just 1 hour. You know, you look at the way these parents drop off, it's kind of spread out over 2.5 hours. So you have 74 during the busiest hour. You know, maybe the second busiest hour, it's at like 50, maybe the third busiest hour, it's at like 30. So you do end up you won't have 200 parents drop off because you have about 15%, I think, are siblings, and about 5 to 8% students are out either vacation or sickness or just not coming to school that day. So you won't have 200 cars. We're estimating, again, 74 cars during the busiest morning hour coming to the site. And they're distributed within this parking time period.
Okay, right. And that's right at school time for our neighboring schools, correct?
So your morning is clipping it. Again, it's around the same time period in terms of your morning schools. I think I have your bell schedule in my notes here on one of the pages.
Yeah, I think high school is 7:45 and Washington school, but they all they go like.
Yeah, I'm seeing 8:30 to 2:30, I think, or something like that. Maybe.
No,
that might be.
That's not right.
Oh no, that might be one of the pre-Ks nearby. Okay, that's Kent Place. I think was 8:30 to 2:30. Sorry, I was reading up another list. Okay, Washington 8:15 to 3, Oratory Prep 8:10 to 2:40 is what I have in my notes in terms of the bell schedules. But again, so the morning, again, looking at Washington at 8:15, we're catching a piece of it. 8 o'clock, we're at 10. Our peak is probably a little bit earlier than that, but again, you're probably catching the tail end of our peak.
The high school is quite busy on a normal non-COVID year. I've experienced it many mornings, and and you have to get your child there by 7:45 or they're late. And they basically say 7:30 to 7:45. And that would be right at your peak as well, I think.
Our peak is
the last
generally.
question I have, and I'm sure everybody else has other questions, is so these are really young children. They're infants and they're up to 4 years old. And so, I'll just stick to traffic because there were a lot of discussions of possibly having more children, but then again, your attorney said that you'll stick to 200 children. But, a lot of things can happen when you have an infant and, or you have a really sad toddler, sitting in the parking lot. It's not seamless to just drop off children. It can take a lot more time than 5 minutes. So, what is your contingency plan for that? I don't know if 12 spaces is going to be sufficient for the complications of dropping off such young children.
Yep. And again, I have a young child, so I know how fussy it could be, whether getting their coat on or off could take a matter of minutes.
I like that coat.
The benefit is if you look from a parking demand, and I guess we'll keep this chart up here, during that time period, even if, let's say, we only had 12 spaces reserved for parent drop off and pickup during that time period, we're still looking at a parking demand of 23 or 26 or even 31 during that busiest hour. So there's still 9 parking spaces elsewhere on that lot in case things kind of get backed up due to fussiness. If that ends up being the issue, I will tell you what we were able to do from the Primrose data is get an understanding of not only the check-in, check-out time, but also the parking space turnover time. So we feel, again, we wanted to err on the side of conservativeness here. So, we took, we looked at, okay, sometimes it's 4 minutes, sometimes it's 6 minutes, but we went with a 95% confidence interval, feeling that even though at Mountainside and Berkeley Heights, it was never more than 11 at one point, we said, let's build it to 12. If you told me, I feel really comfortable if you give us 14 drop off and pickup, during those busiest peak time period, I have no problem doing that as well, because where they drop off and pick up, we've got that extra space there.
And then sometimes the teachers or the caregivers want to speak to the parents, things like that occur. It's just things to think about. Okay, I'm gonna let my other fellow board members ask you some questions.
All right, so falling down our list, Mr. Brinkerhoff. Jay, have you got any questions for Mr. Seckler?
He's on mute.
You're on mute, Jay.
No, nothing from me at this point. Thank you.
All right, sure. All right, colleagues, continuing down, Mr. Glory.
Yes, just real quick, why not do a 2020 study? I mean, it would certainly have its caveats. It wouldn't necessarily be totally reflective, but it would also supplement the existing data you have to perhaps create a full picture.
Again, to me, it's just in terms of the accuracy of the data. Again, I clearly could have done it. I feel like I'd get a lot of questions of how come you're drawing conclusions from COVID time period. But again, if that's something that, is necessary, we definitely could do it. I just, again, looking at the data that we have from 2011, growing it, year over year over year over year, I think we're getting the proper roadway volumes. I just don't have the data from the side streets I don't have gates. Like there's no study that's been done on gates over the years that I could utilize for that piece of things. So it's kind of a missing value in that.
Okay, I mean, certainly the growing the numbers is an algorithm that sort of allows us to hypothesize about what could be, but I don't think it would be terribly harmful, and we certainly wouldn't rely on it solely if we also understood in real time what was also happening. That would perhaps create a real picture. Certainly, if my fellow board members feel that that would be helpful, it would be something that I would want to see. What is the square footage of the Primrose in Berkeley Heights and Mountainside? And do they also have accompanying office space within their facilities as well?
I believe the Berkeley Heights is within a kind of shared facility. I think there's other sites within, I think there's another use within the site. I will, and I'm pulling up the data for my reports. Hold on. Let me grab it for you. I know it's comparable, but I want to give you the exact numbers. So let me just.
I mean, I see that you write that the Berkeley Heights facility has a licensed operating capacity of 201 students, and I know you've talked about 200 here.
Yeah.
But do we know the square footage, and do we also know whether or not that they also have office space the way this building does?
Yeah, and again, I know Mountainside is on its own. That's on its own lot, so that does not share office space. I believe they're about between 12 and 13,000 square feet, both of the sites. And again, Berkeley Heights has 201, Mountainside has 194. And I think that Berkeley Heights shares it with a restaurant as opposed to a office building or an office use.
Okay, so just one of those locations shares space.
Yep.
Okay, and you had intonated that you were somewhat aware of some of the parking regulations that existed on Webster and Gates. Do you know what they are?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could go through them with. I believe on Gates, there's no parking on I'm going to say the east side. When you're driving out of the site, there's no parking 8 to 4. On the west side, I believe it's 2-hour parking. On Webster, I believe it's 2-hour parking 8 to 6. There is areas of no parking kind of between the driveways and Morris. And Morris also allows for a specific hourly time period parking as well.
And I know it was brought up in an earlier meeting, but there was the concern that, obviously if the lot is full because a fussy child decides the coat that he or she has on isn't acceptable to enter to be viewed by their classmates or friends, that somebody wouldn't simply just get in the habit of parking on a side street just to settle down the fuss and then relax, and then we'll just walk over to the building together, that wouldn't become a habit.
Yeah, I don't see that being a regular occurrence. Again, I think we have sufficient parking within our site to support this development. So I don't see it being a everyday occurrence. Again, I can't, unless the city wants to create some sort of ordinance that prevents someone from parking there and running in. But again, the way that we've designed the site, where our parking field is, where the front door is, I think it's going to be a lot more welcoming to park in the site, closest to the front door, relatively limited weather exposure than anything else.
And then I know that there was discussion of a keypad entry, that there was a sort of vestibule in which people would bring their child before they were actually let into the facility. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a security measure when you enter the building, key fob or code type entry, and that's actually how we get a lot of the data that we got. All the employee data that we got was based on log in, log out from the kind of key fob or passcode information.
And meaning the parent is provided with the key fob or the passcode.
Correct. Yeah, the student is not the one responsible. I mean, I think the student may
But
have
there's
something on them.
There's
but-
no employee letting them in. It's literally the parent engaging the locking system and being able to get in and out. And I guess I asked because perhaps the fussy child is one delay, but is there also delay where your fob doesn't work or somebody can't get the button right and now we're forming a line because people can't get in or out?
I think that there is, and again, this may be a better question for the operation, but right outside the vestibule is the reception desk. So, and the main office. So I believe there is a visual to the vestibule. So, again, I think it's also a safety measure to make sure the right parent is there and the right person is picking up and dropping off children. So there is a visual involved as well. But they're required to basically check in and check out, similar to doing attendance in elementary school. It's basically how they get an understanding. And there's a video camera. So again, if there's a kind of closed caption video camera, so you could see the parent. And again, if they, I guess for some reason have an issue, I guess they could be buzzed in as long as the staff welcomes them into the building.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Councilmember Little?
Thank you, Chairman Anderson. I just have a few questions. Within the 40 spaces, you have 2 that are designated as ADA compliant. Are those the handicap restricted or are they just curb access and park there?
Those are handicap restricted. Those are the federal requirement ADA spaces.
So there's really only 38 spaces that are really usable by the majority of the people that are coming into the parking lot.
I mean, what we're seeing in terms of the number of people that have ADA accessible parking permissions is generally in line with the percentage of parking spaces that are provided for the ADA. So again, I think that, when you're looking at 40 parking spaces, odds are you'll have 1 or 2 people out of 40 that would require that additional accessibility.
Okay.
I can't speak to whether it's going to be an employee or a
Okay.
parent that requires it, but
I would think that those would generally not be used during the day, but we can go on. And then the 2 facilities in Mountainside and Berkeley Heights, you've said that they're about the same size. How many parking spaces do you have for both of those sites in terms of parent parking and employee parking?
So I think Berkeley Heights has 37 parking spaces. I think Mountainside, and I'm going to check my notes.
That's for both parents and employees?
Yes. And I think Mountainside has, I'm going through my notes here. I think Mountainside has slightly more. I want to say the number maybe 45, but I'm going to get that answer before I finish tonight, so I could get you that number on the record.
Okay, and I have one final question. On the traffic impact study, you calculate the number of spaces that are required under the City of Summit ordinances based on the square footage of office space and the employee numbers, and it's calculated as 51 required spaces. Is that based on the full office space, or is that number calculated on the reduced office space, giving half of the space to Primrose?
So 51 was based on the full 6,102 square feet office space number.
So what's the new requirement under the City of Summit ordinances? What are we asking for a variance?
Let me get you.
What are you asking for a variance from the required number?
It's a good question. Hold on, let me pull it up. Let's see, it's divided by 300. It's going to be about 10 less than that, 10 or 11 less than that. So let me do the math. It's 3,000 divided by 300, so that's 10. It'd be 41. I'm calculating that to be 41 parking spaces necessary, and we have 40.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but is that accurate?
I
Because
don't
that,
think, that doesn't sound accurate, but
and that square footage isn't disappearing. That's still square footage that exists, albeit devoted over to Primrose as opposed to the a generic office or general office space. And I apologize, Council
No,
Member Little, for jumping in, but I want to help make sure you get an accurate and correct answer.
So my calculation is, again, and I agree, we noticed for the 52 spaces. I think the question was related to if you didn't count the Primrose space. And in that case, I have the office requires one space for every 300 square feet. So for 3,000 square feet, that would be 10 spaces. And the daycare requires one space per staff plus 3 spaces. So that would be 31. We have 28 employees and 3 is the kicker. So that would be the 31 for the Primrose, and I'm counting 10 for the office, and that would be 41. Again, I'm not stating that's what we're requesting. That's just the calculation that was that was just asked of us.
That's not a required number, though. The required number remains 51 under the ordinance, correct?
I mean, I guess it comes down to whether that extra 3,102 square feet is office or if it's daycare. Daycare square footage does not get counted within the parking calc. If it's office, it does.
Well, somebody will have to weigh in that formally so that when we draft the resolution, we have the accurate.
wait, Andy, wait a second. So but the city would require 10 spaces for the office and you're allocating 5 within the parking space for the office. Is that correct?
We could allocate 5 to 6. We think the demand is going to be 5. We could dedicate 6. We could dedicate more. But again, my recommendation was 5 or 6. It was the row as you enter the site from Morris Avenue.
Okay. And then where were the 2 handicap ADA spaces located in the parking plan?
Would you, I would like to, I guess, bring up exhibit A7. That's probably easier than me trying to cardinally direction this. So let me pull it up on the screen.
Actually, A8.
This is A8 or A7?
This is A.
That's it.
So this is the site plan rendering. The ADA spaces are these 2 ADA stalls in blue. As you enter the building, they would be the first spaces on your right when you enter the site. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I think those are all of my questions at the moment.
Okay, that's very good. Ms. McNeil. Hey, Ellen, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I don't have any questions right now. Thank you.
Okay, fine, thanks. All right, we'll go on to Mr. Perella.
Just to follow up on Ms. Little's question. So you're basically saying that the 3,000 feet is disappearing and we don't need to cover it for an office space, correct?
I mean, I'm stating that, I would say it's debatable whether it needs to be counted in your parking ordinance or not.
Well, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you've just said that Primrose is going to use it and it's not going to be leasable office space. And therefore you don't need parking for it. So if Primrose down in the future decides they don't need it because it's just break room and hangout space, and then you go to try and lease it to somebody, you're going to need our parking space. So are you going to stipulate now as a condition of having this approved that you will never lease it to a third-party tenant and therefore not require any parking space for it, and it will be dead space and you can put books in there? Because you're asking us to approve something that we then no longer have control over when you find out you don't need this space in the future.
I'll wait for my counsel to speak.
Yeah, I don't. So I believe
I'm
the
asking
testimony.
if you're willing to stipulate that you will never lease the 3,000 feet to a third party that will require parking, because you're asking us to approve something with less spaces, and now you're leaving the door open to this board that there's a possibility that Primrose may not need this space, and you'll decide to lease it.
I'll have to confer with my client before we agree to a condition like that. I think the testimony was that we were requesting the variance and with the operations that it would function properly. Mr. Seckler is being asked a specific question as to how that parking ratio changes under the ordinance. But I didn't change his testimony as to the justification for the variance originally, even at the 52 space requirement, as to how the site would function. Now, I don't know how the city of Summit works when new tenants come in and whether they have to get site plan approval or site plan waiver, but typically whenever a new tenant is coming in and there's a change to a parking requirement, they're usually brought in before the board to address that issue.
Yeah,
It seems to me as if you want to have it both ways. You want to say you only need 41 spaces, but the requirement is 51, but you don't need it. And I'm not trying to be hostile, but I'm trying to understand and not have the board have to deal with a situation or the city deal with a situation that we went to approve something because you told us you were going to use it. And so the requirement is 51 spaces. Whether or not you use it, as far as I'm concerned, and Mr. Warner and somebody else can tell me from the city, the requirement for this site is 51 spaces. Whether you choose to use 3,000 of the office space for breakout, and the possibility still exists that you decide not to use it, and then it gets leased to a third party, and the requirement for parking remains. The other thing that's not being addressed is that there's 9,000 square feet of basement space, which could or could not be used for office space. There's some companies that sit in trading rooms and like the dark. So the 9,000 square feet of basement space, I don't see how, like, maybe I'm missing something, but is that in the calculation of the parking requirements? Is that never going to be leased to a third party?
So I think there's three things to address there. First, under the theory of under the first proposition, anytime you granted you wouldn't be able to grant a parking variance. Anytime you granted a parking variance, there would be some sort of condition attached to that use. I think what we can agree to, and we don't have a problem with, is as a condition of approval, it's the grant, any grant of a variance associated with the parking is tied to the fact that there is 3,000 square feet being used by Primrose as administrative. And if that ever changes to a different tenant, even if it's still in office use, if it's a different tenant, we need to come back, or either the property owner and or tenant needs to come back to the board to get a modification, either to demonstrate and prove to the board the parking still remains sufficient, and obtain approval for it and a modification of that. I think we're agreeable to that. But to have a restriction saying we can never lease it to another office tenant is overly restrictive. I think there's a manner in which it can come back before this board, and whoever that then tenant has to demonstrate to the board that the parking is sufficient. And again, some of this is again self-policing. I think there was a question at the last meeting about, well, you could fit 50 people in there, and well, yeah, but a business that has 50 employees isn't going to lease this space because there's not enough parking for it.
But Mr. Giamatti, with all due respect, that's not necessarily true, because if somebody lives locally and they want to have a trading room, or they want to do something, or they want to come to the bus, the question that Mr. Zucker asked was purely, what is the maximum capacity to the space? He didn't ask about the marketing or the leasability of the space. And that's not testimony that we've discussed. The question that Mr. Zucker purely asked was, what was the maximum capacity of the space? And based on 6,000 feet, at 100 people, at 100, 1 per 100, it's 60 people. We don't need to discuss the marketability. Let's just focus on the parking. If the procedure is that you need to come back before the board, whether it's the owner or the tenant, and Mr. Warner can let us know, then that's fine. But what we don't want to have a situation is where somewhere down the line, you just decide we don't need it because nobody's hanging out in the break room. And now we're faced with the fact that there's a big availability sign on the property, along with the other 5 signs, that the space is available, and we have another 20 or 30 people in there, and you need more parking. That's
Let's hear
all
from,
I'm trying
let's
to
hear from
prevent.
Mr. Warner. Let's hear from Mr. Warner if that mechanism actually works. The mechanism proposed by Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To bring it to a close, it does. That's what I was going to suggest as a stipulation from the applicant, if the applicant was so willing to give it for the board to account for that circumstance. That's generally what's done. If you're going to lease that additional 3,000 or any portion of the 3,000 square feet, that if the board grants the relief sought, presumably then the board will be doing so with the understanding that that 3,000 square feet is used by Primrose as flex space or something similar, and any leasing or change in the tenancy or use of that space would require the applicant to come back to the board and reestablish an entitlement to the parking variance by way of an amended approval of variance relief, and the board would retain jurisdiction for same, and that would be spelled out in the conditions section of a resolution, again, if the relief is granted.
Okay.
And
so
assuming that that's what the board wants.
let's go on to Mr. Zucker. And Mr. Pirelli, you finished questions?
No, I just have one other thing. So back to the drop-off times.
Yeah, that's the right.
So the elementary school starts at 8:15. My kids went to Washington School. So people are starting to drop off kids at 8 o'clock. The high school starts at 7:45. The high school kids are flying down the block and up and down Morris Avenue and in and around the side streets by 7:30 or so. There's also oratory and there's Kent Place. So your peak times are going to be right at the times of all four of those schools. Just to clarify what Ms. Alvarez was asking before. Secondly, with respect to dropping off and having sufficient parking spaces, I had 3 kids that went to daycare, one for 5 years and one for 4. I took all 3 of them over there at the same time. Never was I in and out of the building in 5 minutes. So I'm a little bit perplexed as to how you think you have enough spots to drop off with 74 cars at the peak hour. I'm missing something.
And again, I think that, again, obviously not all 74 are coming the same 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I mean, as you said, there's traffic on the roads that's going to be somewhat holding back the amount of parents they could get here in one, 2-minute time period, 5-minute time period. But we feel confident from observing these sites that typically we could get parents. It may feel like 20 minutes while your kid is screaming and you're trying to get them in the door because you're running late for work, but we're seeing averages about 5 minutes. Of course, there's some that are 8 minutes, and maybe there's some kindergartners that they see their friend, they're running to the front door, ready to get in there. So they're a little less than 5 minutes. But again, we're seeing about an average of 5 minutes, 6 minutes in terms of getting them in the door and to their teacher. I don't think we're seeing even faster times with COVID, but obviously it's a little bit of an unusual situation now.
Okay, so how many exact spots are there just for parents to pull in and drop off? Just pull in and stay in the 5 minutes.
So I'm going to share my screen again, just so we have them up. So this is A7 again. I was proposing.
Sorry, it's A8.
Do I keep saying the wrong one? Okay,
yeah.
Great. That'll be wonderful on the court reporter. The 9 spaces closest to the building, and I was assuming the 3 over here. We have the ability to add more drop off and pickup if necessary, because they won't get filled until the employees come, in the little bit outside of that peak. So again, if the board wants 15 spaces that say parent, and again, they're not restricted only to those spaces, but we could make it 15 spaces if that's something the board wants to see in terms of available for parents to drop off and pick up.
So not all of the staff will be on site while the kids are being dropped off. Is that in compliance with the state regulation? You're going to have more kids in the building than you're going to have employees? Is that what you just? Did I miss that?
So
it's every school.
So this is let me just title. This was the October 15th submission that we previously went through when we looked at the table. What we show here is that you actually don't get to peak employee demand for the Primrose until about 11 a.m. There are certain teachers that come just to teach a special program in the middle of the day, or they may double up have some extra staff around so that some teachers could take lunch, and then then they don't need to double up extra people. So you have 28 staff basically between 11 and 12:30, but before that you basically ramp up to that number and then you ramp down from that point. So not all staff are there at that at the beginning part of the day. And I can't speak from the legal standpoint. This is from their employee check-in, check-out information.
All right, I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Perrella. Mr. Zucker.
I just had a follow-up to Councilwoman Little's question. And this has also to do with drop-off. I'm a bit concerned about the overflow out of the lot. I wanted to know about the Berkeley Heights property. Again, tell me again how many spots you have there.
I believe it's 38 on that site.
And are there other structures? Because that's Springfield Avenue, correct?
Yes.
So are there other buildings and neighboring lots sort of that are adjoining it, maybe easily crossover? In other words, overflow lots that people can use or would use? I mean,
there is a restaurant that's next door. I think there's even dry cleaners in that same building. I know the parking spaces within the lot are somewhat signed in the sense that it's for whoever only, for I think the cleaner and maybe the restaurant only. So again, assuming that they follow those regulations like we would follow, we expect our employees to follow their regulations. There is limited overflow.
I guess what I'm asking, and I don't know, you can tell me this, I'm assuming the employees park where they should, but if parents are looking to drop off and are finding a crowded lot, they could easily use an overflow lot, a neighboring lot for 5 minutes. And that's convenient in Berkeley Heights, but in Summit, we've got, the only thing you have is Gates Avenue. I mean, you only have the side streets.
Well, maybe and Mr. Warner, if you would like to how you would like to handle it, whether you just use it by reference, but if we've been talking about the Berkeley Heights facility a lot, if we maybe did like a Google Maps aerial, if that may help.
If you want, I could do a screenshot of it so it's a fixed item that could be entered into the record. Is that something that would help?
It's the chair's discretion, but certainly if the applicant wishes to answer the question with an exhibit, the chair may wish to permit that.
I mean, I think that would make it more precise. It'd be easier to see what John is suggesting. I've driven by the site. I know generally what Mr. Sickler is talking about. So let's go ahead and pull it up.
Okay.
I think we're up to 810, Chris.
Okay. This is A10. I did a screenshot again if you would prefer me to just to bring up the actual website, but I guess this could be more easily entered into the record. This is the Berkeley Heights site along Springfield Avenue. Again, it looks like the Google image was taken in 2020, perhaps. What you have is about 20 spaces located in front of the Primrose that are generally utilized by the Primrose. Again, there's no signs that exclusively keep that for Primrose, but that's obviously where the majority of the parents drop off and pick up. Then you have parking spaces, and you could see it on this aerial, they're yellow labels. So again, about 20 spaces that are right in front of the Primrose site. Then you have these yellow indicated spaces that all say, various tenant parking. I believe there's a set that's for the Italian deli. There's some that's for the cleaners. Then you have the ADA spaces. And then you have a number of spaces that are, I think for a couple of the other tenants within the building. I think there's a clothing shop, and then there's some unmarked spaces. So the total of the unmarked spaces is, I believe, less than 38. Let me see if I could count them up while we're here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. looks like 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And then we have about 20. So I believe that's the 37 or 38 that are available to us. The remainder of them are marked for various tenants that are not us.
I think
By
Mr.
us, I mean
point is
Primrose.
that,
Sorry about
that if someone, chose to, they could sneak into another space, perhaps.
Sorry, how many unmarked spots are there for those other tenants?
That's what I'm saying. I believe there's about 37 unmarked spaces. The remainder of the spaces are marked.
No, I'm saying that 37 is for what's Primrose has there, right? But how many spots are there in addition to those 37?
So those would be the ones that are marked. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Apologies.
12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33. I'll say about 35, and I'm counting the ADA spaces as well for the other building, not our building's ADA.
All right, Mr. Zucker, does that help answer your question?
I guess so you're saying there's 35 plus the 37?
I believe that's what I've counted, yes.
All right. I'm just seeing that that's an opportunity, during drop off, you really have a lot more options if you're dropping off there than we would have. But do you have any set? I mean, I know you're going on the numbers you've offered, that the formula works. Do you have any experience with people, flowing into the neighboring lot?
Again, I can't speak to this specific site. We got the data from Primrose in terms of their check-in, check-out of employees, check-in, check-out of their students or children. So that's what I was relying on. So again, I can't speak to whether if there was an empty Primrose spot in the back and the parent decided to park in the Italian deli. I don't know, if they made that move or not. I just only get there. But I'm saying from the total number, from the sum, it would work. This Berkeley Heights site would work if they just utilize their own parking spaces is what I'm saying. I don't know specifically where they park though.
Okay. All right. I just think the two sites are apples and oranges now that I see that they have a lot more potential than we did. But I understand what you're saying. All right.
I think also it's fair. It has a lot more intensive uses and additional uses than what we have.
Granted. Okay.
Thanks.
I don't have any more questions on that.
Yeah, Mr. Fiore.
So are you, a few things. I do think it's apples to oranges with the lots. I mean, to me, that's clear. I'm not questioning the data, but they're very different geographies in those lots. As far as, so you're working off of data from check-in to check-out, but there's not data to when someone pulls in, how long are they at their car with their children, is there?
So what we have done we've done similar operations at other daycare facilities. So the amount of time that it takes for someone to get in and out of a building, we've observed at, I would say probably a half dozen other daycare facilities within Union, Morris, Essex County. So the add-on, the check-in, check-out, parent drops the kid off, parent comes back out the door. That's in the frame of sometimes a minute and a half or even less. We basically added a buffer on that, to account for the walk to the car or the close, walk to the car, walk back to the car based on other site observations. So we did not just use the data that that they gave us from Primrose and said, okay, the parent came in at 8:05, left at 8:06 and 30 seconds. We didn't say it was a minute and a half, a minute and a half. We said it was, we added that other operational observation.
So I mean, listen, I think you've done a great job with the analysis, and I'm not questioning your integrity at all. But I will tell you, as Andy said, I mean, I have 2 kids and I went through this for 12 years. I have never been in a situation where the timelines are even close to what you guys are saying on average. Just from a very practical perspective, I just don't see it. I'm being honest. I just don't see it happening. I mean, and I have kids that aren't whiners or criers, and it took me, generally a lot longer to get them in and out, or you want to talk to the teacher. It just was never a 5-minute thing. Have you guys factored in the kids walking to school at Washington, walking up to the high school, crossing the street? As far as concerns with getting out of that lot and going on to Morris and making a left and getting into the lot, making a left from the other
I would
side.
say, as it relates to that comment or question, I think it's somewhat the fact that because we're stuck utilizing data that was collected pre-COVID, we don't have that kind of that aspect of things. That piece of the puzzle, which is again why I hesitate collecting data and saying and presenting something. Look, we're 70-second delay or 27-second delay as a definitive piece in this kind of COVID time period. It's difficult to collect data now and run that piece.
Yeah. It's more of a comment than a question. And again, I'm not challenging the data you provided or the integrity, but from my side, again, from experience, I just can't see a 5-minute average timeline getting in and out of there. You've got such a tight amount of space there to be doing those turnarounds.
Mr. Fiore, you brought up the point too of pedestrians. There will be kids going, some a little bit older, walking back and forth to school. So that could be an issue. Yeah.
If the board,
there's a lot of issues here. Yeah.
If the board wishes, I also have a screenshot of the Mountainside site that I guess I could utilize as well if the board, because again, I know that it seemed like the comparison to Berkeley Heights wasn't, again, the data's from there. I wasn't stating that it's an exact one-for-one. The way it operates is, I think, is consistent, but the location may be slightly different. If the board wishes, I'd like to share the Mountainside site.
Why don't you show us that? But just before you do that, why don't we ask Mr. Formicelli if he has any questions? Then you can show that exhibit. Shortly after that, we need to give Michael a break. And I think, Mr. Gianni, I think we've got, Mr. Giannetti, I think we've got a point at which we can stop testimony at this point, completing the traffic testimony. And then the board needs to move into other things that we need to do this evening.
Sure.
Does that seem like a reasonable place to stop for your testimony? And Mr. Warner, if you have any thoughts on that?
It's certainly reasonable to try to maybe get the last question, one or two questions from the board. And then if I understand correctly, Mr. Seckler is going to come back to his planning testimony. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask their questions. And then we would move to public comment. And there may even be a witness or an expert witness. I'm just gleaning from my view of the attendees in the public site. I'm familiar with a lot of expert witnesses in the state of New Jersey. I recognize the name. And then we would move to summation and deliberation and vote all next time. So it certainly seems like a good stopping place, maybe when the board finishes its questioning of Mr. Steckler. You're almost there.
I noticed Mr. Burgess is here. Joe, is there any questions you might have with regard to traffic at this point?
I know I came a little late to the party here. But Matt, I know at the last meeting, I had commented or asked you to comment on the issue of when somebody pulls into the parking lot and has to make that right-hand turn into the parking right in front of the front door. How that works in terms of congestion, and if someone finds all these parking spaces filled, what that does to all the vehicular movements in that area. Because you've indicated 74 cars coming into that area in 1 hour, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And then we've got people on average being in those parking spaces for 5-6 minutes, whatever it may be. So how does the freeing up of parking spaces occur to ensure that there's nobody who's going to pull into that parking area and find out that all the spaces are filled, and then they have the choice of either just blocking the aisle a little bit or trying to back up, which could even be worse. How does that all work? And if you've addressed that, just tell me, because I came in late.
I don't think I addressed it directly, but I think I may have addressed it indirectly, maybe before you were here. So again, the way the site is designed, the 9 spaces along the closest to the building are drop off, and then the last 3 is how we had suggested. Some board members were wondering maybe we had a couple more at the end. But if you're a parent coming in, the reason why we picked these last few on the residential side is so that if you came to the end and there were no available spaces, again, based on our calculation, 95% confidence interval, that there would, you'd be able to satisfy within 12 parking spaces the demand. If for some reason you got to the end and there was no parking available, you do have this hatch area to basically to pull in and K-turn and come out. But again, our thought is by having these be the, I'm going to say the overflow parent drop off, that you'd likely come down here, even if all 9 are taken across the front of the building, one of these last 3 are available. Again, we could adjust this. We could make this a spot and make this a hatch spot so that you basically come in here and you K-turn the other direction. And again, we heard suggestions from the board. Maybe we make it 15 drop-off spaces. Again, to us, we feel comfortable with 12. Sorry, with 12. We could add a few more, so we're erring on the side of safety, Joe, so that we feel confident with 12. We'll give you 15 spaces for drop off and pickup, and hopefully 3 of these are never used anytime someone comes here.
At a peak 5 or 10 minute period, how many of these spaces do you anticipate being filled?
And that was the 12. That was basically, we did a Poisson distribution, and I had to, as I mentioned earlier, dig out the old statistics book to figure out, how to do the calculation. But basically, it looks at your peak demand of 75, and you basically run, what is the percentage that if you have 75 over an hour, that you have a period where you have 5 cars that's the max, or 6 cars the max, 7 cars the max. And we ran those numbers all the way up till we could feel 95% confident that the maximum demand for drop-offs will be 12 cars or less. And that's basically what the calculation was.
And you have 21 spaces in there in total.
Yeah, in this kind of, again, we'll say dead end field, there's 21 spaces.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Sorry, Paul, I cut you off there. Mr. Formicelli, do you have any questions?
I do. Thanks, Bill. Matt, two main sort of ballparks for questioning here. One sort of is a following up on what Andy was saying earlier, but in terms of the additional office use, the 3,000 square feet, that would not be the flex space, but would be the actual potential office user. Is there a specific use in mind for that space by the future ownership? Because depending upon what that use is, it can definitely affect the traffic and the parking in different ways, whether that's anything from a showroom to a medical office, to a law firm, to a financial services office. Different uses are going to require different amounts of foot traffic, or is there a retail component, even though it's not ground level, to that where the public is coming to that space?
Yeah, so I guess I'll answer, and then the council might want to
Sure.
jump in, or my council may jump in. So again, we utilize the IT standard numbers. So again, that's average data. There's obviously some offices that generate very little parking and some that generate a little bit more parking.
So
I do know that if we were a retail use,
Right.
again, I think our calculation for what the parking demand would be different than 1 for every 300 square feet. And the IT numbers would be different. So I'm not contemplating a retail use. I don't know if our council wants to mention in terms of what any current tenants sticking around, not sticking around that we know of.
Well, I think as we testified, or not testified, was discussed briefly at one point, and though our office is not handling any of the transaction associated with this site, our understanding is there's an architect's office already at the facility, and there's a lease in place with the existing property owner that they have their rights under and will remain going forward.
But for how long, do you know, Craig?
I do not know. I apologize.
Okay. I mean, well, I guess maybe a different way to pose that question is, would their tenancy be based on whatever? Well, I guess if they have an existing lease in place, are they going to simply play that out, or is it going to be extended prior to any tenancy or occupancy there.
I don't know the term, if there's any options to extend under that existing lease for the property and how that works.
And I think I would be able to stipulate, looking at the city's ordinance, medical and dental offices require double the amount of parking than a general office per your code. So again, I think that the variance we'd be looking for would be completely different. So again, I think in terms of the concern that, who could occupy that space, again, it looks like it can't be a medical or dental office, or else it has to be back before the board. It couldn't be a retail sales building, because that has different parking standards, so it'd be back before the board. So again, I think that hopefully those mechanisms allows for kind of a narrow window of what the existing or what the proposed office could be.
Right. Okay. And when you reference, Matt, ITA standards or an ITA standard, what does that standard actually point to? What is the classification for what you're considering the standard?
Yeah. So and I tend not to try to use the word standard. It's more of a guide. Basically, it's a collection of data that as I said earlier, I wouldn't just go in here and pull out the general office number, because it's based on office buildings that average up to 150,000 square feet. I don't think that's similar to what we have here. So I basically had to filter down the data to get to data that I felt comfortable in terms of what the expected parking demand would be. So I basically filtered down the data to office buildings between 3,000 and 10,000 square feet, and then I utilized. Let me grab the exact number.
I'm sorry to make you reiterate a little bit of this, but I want to drill down into this a little more.
Yeah. So basically, I utilized their average peak parking demand. So what they have, again, I don't have the exact number of samples that fit between 3,000 and 10,000, but let's say there were 20 sites that engineers like myself have counted the parking demand that are between 3,000 and 10,000. What we put in the book is the maximum demand that we saw over that day. So if we sat in that building, we sat in the parking lot, and there was 5 cars were out there at 7 a.m. and 20 cars were out there at 10 p.m. We write down 20 in the book, and then it gets compiled with all these other items. And then I took the average of those peaks. So I basically, if there are 20 sites, and we list all those peaks in order, and I take the average of that peak demand for an office building.
Okay. I mean, depending upon my concern stems from just depending upon the use. And, this is going from, depending upon how we want to talk about the building, a Class C former manufacturing building that is for a local law firm to a Class A modernized, completely retrofitted building that would have arguably a different type of user going forward, even if it is attached to a daycare center. The footage standards per employee are different even than the parking that the town currently stipulates. And, often for a transaction like that, I'll often see, in a lease where the client will require 4 spots per 1,000 square feet leased, and 2 spots per 1,000, which is what I think you're proposing for this, is more typical of a manufacturing building in most markets, and those are even suburban markets. So I'm particularly concerned that 6 spots is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Here. I would argue that the 9 or 10 that the town is requiring currently is probably the bare minimum based on modern office usage, where footage per head is continually going down despite COVID. And 2 years from now, it'll probably be back approximately to where it is 9 months before. Anyway, that's my own. But thank you for clarifying on that.
And again, and I think I now understand that you were thinking more of a class type office building. Again, unfortunately, I don't have the breakdown of class. Again, assuming it's 3,000 to 10,000 square feet. Again, I also don't know what this would be considered from the class standpoint. I'm not an architect or a realtor or appraiser, but again, I imagine most 3,000 to 10,000 square feet may not be the super tall glass, class A building. But again, I don't know what this would be considered either.
No, I understand. And the reason, but where I will differentiate for you is, there is no super tall glass building in this town, right? The tallest buildings are maybe 4 stories high. And the buildings in the neighborhood that are even closely equivalent, and they're not equivalent exactly, but if you talk about like a 180 River where Hub is located, or 190 River where Wells Fargo is, and maybe those are not comparable, or the Bristol Myers complex, but those will have, I would assume, a much higher parking ratio. And it'd be interesting if you knew what the data on those were. But the 2 other buildings that I would think about in this, and I don't know if you have the numbers on this, but 92 River right by Lafayette, which is not by Lafayette, 92 River, which is the Solomon organization, but 510 Morris, where Lakeland Bank and that's right by Lafayette or close to Lafayette, what they did there for that ratio, I'd be curious to hear what that is. And that use is very different than this use here. So if you know the answers to that, great. If you don't, let's move on. I've got another question or two.
Yeah, I personally don't know those specific parking demand on those sites.
Okay. So let's move on because maybe we can come back to that later on. But my next question is, and if you just leave the screenshot that you've got here now, when someone's exiting the lot onto Gates Avenue and they make a left, how many car lengths are there approximately there before you get to Morris Avenue? And then you can probably guess my next question is at what point does it get to a critical threshold where someone decides to make a right turn instead of a left turn onto Gates?
Yes. Let me get you the two pieces there. So the distance from the driveway to Gates is about 140 feet. So that's about 7 car lengths. Just judging about 20 feet a car. So that's about 7 car lengths. I don't know what would hit that threshold. Again, I know we have no issue with designating that driveway as no right out or a left turn only type of designation. I don't think there's any desire. Again, the one reason why I would hesitate that is if you happen to have a resident that lives down Gates or Colonial or on one of the roads down there that wants to get back home with their child. I would hesitate that they would have to go all the way around the block. But again, our intention is not to send that traffic that direction to the neighborhood unless they're from that neighborhood. But again, I would leave that up to the board if they think that's a useful prohibition.
I mean, I hate to give it anecdotal information on this, but I know we're all going to at some point here. And just from personal experience living in the neighborhood, looping around and going over to Lafayette where the traffic light is can sometimes be handy, but it's not ideal for both the neighborhood or the people walking around there. And it could be, and in a high traffic environment where, in terms of pedestrians, where a lot of kids are walking to the high school and or walking to Washington, some additional traffic certainly could be a little hazardous at worst and annoying at best.
Understood.
Paul, anything else?
That's it. That's all I've got for now.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Steckler, really quickly, get us to Mountainside, then we're going to put this, go on to next month.
Absolutely. So before the board is, I guess, the newest exhibit. This is the Mountainside site.
A11.
A11 on the right-hand side is Springfield Avenue, conveniently also the street name that Berkeley Heights was on, although not close to one another. Here's the site. I think it is a little more comparable to the proposed site in Summit in the sense that there's not really any shared uses here. I think the adjoining lot is a assisted living or a memory care facility. This lot, I believe, has 33 spaces and then a bus space. This site does have a bus service. I don't believe we're proposing one at the Summit location, but there are 33 parking spaces plus this one bus located at this site. And I think the bus brings over, it might be better for some operational testimony in terms of how the bus operates, but it's more of a bring over, I believe, some aftercare children as opposed to, picking up kids for the morning enrollment type of operation. But again, this is the site. Again, I would say somewhat comparable in the sense it has dead end drive aisles, similar to our proposed site. Really doesn't have any overflow ability other than what any overflow ability at all. There's no parking permitted on Springfield Avenue.
Okay, good. That's helpful, Mr. Steckler. Thanks. Yep. All right, so at this point, we're going to put an end to this particular segment with regard to traffic. We'll reconvene with this particular application on 7:30 at night on December 21st, coming up next month. Mr. Warner, anything you would add to that? We'll take a break here, give Michael and all of us a 10-minute break, and the board will come back and discuss the council referral items. We will then go in, the hearing will then end, public hearing will then end. We will go into a separate Zoom call to discuss staff consultants for the coming year in a executive session.
There are a few
Chairman.
things that need to be addressed, Mr. Chairman. One, Mr. Giannetti, you'll give the board an extension of time to act through the end of the month of December 2020 in writing?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank
And
you.
just to follow up, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Warner, I guess, and we've been appreciative that so far every hearing, we basically were really the only thing on the agenda. But just so I can throw out there whether the board would entertain a special meeting between now and the December 21st meeting, just because I know as we get closer to the holidays and, well, might be a little easier this year, but usually when with the regular meetings, sometimes it's tough getting a quorum close to the holidays.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that the board may have a special meeting already scheduled on the 14th for a different matter, and so I suspect that might be difficult for the board, but it's certainly the board to consider.
Mr. Nicola, can you comment on that? I thought we had a scheduled hearing for that date.
It's not been official yet, but Bristol Myers Squibb has requested a special meeting, and the date that makes the most sense is the 14th. So something that would need to be discussed by the board, and if everybody can attend, then that night would be reserved for them. So it does not look like between then and now.
Yeah, unfortunately, Mr. Giannetti, I'm afraid we're going to have to stick to the 21st, since someone has already pushed their way into the special meeting category.
And Mr. Chairman, that would be 7:30 PM remote, as was this meeting. And just to be clear, if I may, for the board and the members of the public, we would be proceeding with Mr. Seckler's continued direct testimony. I take it he'll be focusing on the planning, having already focused on the traffic. Then when he's complete, assuming he's the last witness, members of the public, in addition to board members and board professionals, members of the public will have a full and fair opportunity to question Mr. Seckler on all his testimony, traffic testimony, and his planning testimony, as well as to the extent he hit on any architectural or operational testimony as well. After all that questioning and the conclusion of Mr. Giannetti's client's case, then members of the public would have their full and fair opportunity to comment, testify under oath, including any expert witnesses that members of the public might have. As I mentioned, I gleaned a name that I recognized on the attendee list. That's an expert witness. And then when that's concluded, then there would be a summation by the applicant, and the board would deliberate and vote. So it's fair to assume that there'll be at least one more hearing, and I guess that's going to be December 21, 7:30 PM remote, without further notice, with the extension of time to act for the board through the end of December 2020, which we'll get in writing from Mr. Giannetti. And I take it also someone will address an additional variance that I understand is necessary, and that's the need for electrical vehicle charging spaces. And there's an ordinance provision that addresses that. That's a traffic/parking/planning issue. So I just want to make sure, for the board's benefit and the public's benefit, everyone's applicant's benefit, everyone's benefit, that additional variance, which has not yet previously been called out, is addressed by the applicant, because it's a part of this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you all from the board's perspective for hanging in there too. We'll take a little bit of a break, but thank you, Mr. Giannetti, Mr. Seckler, Mr. Taylor, and Mr. Casay for sticking in there with us. We appreciate it very much. And we really hope, Mr. Giannetti, we can kick off the new year having this case resolved and it all resolved before the holidays at the end of the month of December.
We welcome that opportunity, Mr. Chairman.
All right, guys, we'll take a 10-minute break. Michael, thank you for hanging in there for an extra 30 minutes, and we'll be back in 10 minutes.
No, actually, Michael usually, or Bridget or Michael would only do the public hearing, so.
All right, so they're not going to be involved in the council referral portion of that?
No, we don't need that transcribed, so Michael can actually go, unless you want him to record that portion of the meeting as well.
I just want to express my disappointment for the rest of your evening, guys.
Well, you can hang around if you want, Michael. Thanks. Thank you very much. See you, everybody, in 10 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, do you need me at the rest of the meeting?
Sure, I don't believe so. No, I think unless Chris, you can think any reason we would need Mr. Dorr?
No, I think him, Joe, and Tom Behrens are all off the hook at this point.
And
So
if Joe is still there as well?
actually, we need Joe for the master plan. So
Correct. Okay, good.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you.
All right.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you. Joe, we'll see you in.
Thanks, Chris. You too.
Do you need me or don't you?
Yeah, we do, Joe. We need Joe for the master plan portion of this, right?
I think I was going to be
Are you
handling
going to do that? All
most
right,
of
Tom,
that
we'll see.
discussion, but
It's up to
Certainly.
the folks at
Pick a
Burns,
planner.
how they want to staff it. You guys can draw straws, you know?
I've already had 3. This is my 3rd this evening. So.
All right. So we'll give Joe a break. He can go to bed, and Tom, you're on the hook.
try to make it quick.
Good
Yes.
holiday, everybody.
See you in 10 minutes. Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Okay, greetings.
Waiting for Chris to come back.
Oh, I'm back.
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Excellent.
I think we have everybody. 1, 2, 3.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, maybe a quick roll call if we could.
Yeah, that'd be good. Let's get everybody back. And as everybody knows, when we conclude this meeting, we're going to go to a separate Zoom call that Chris has sent us an email on. So we'll click on that recent email we got from Chris, when we finish with this.
Yeah, that's
Okay, so we'll do a roll call, Chris.
Yep. Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Here.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Sorry, here.
Councilmember Little,
Here.
Mr. Neal,
Here.
Mr. Delory,
Here.
Mr. Zucker,
Here.
Mr. Perrella,
Here.
Mr. Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli,
Here.
and Mr. Warner is in fact here. Bill, you're muted.
Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
And everything I said was so well said, too. Anyway, Mr. Warner will give us a little bit of an introduction in terms of what we're expected to do tonight, basically, for a master plan consistency with both of these items. And also, Councilmember Little can give us a little bit of background with regard to the ordinance with marijuana, retail marijuana in the city. But I want to give a special shout out to Councilmember Little because you're somewhere in North Carolina or South Carolina, Beth, as opposed to being in your home.
Yes, I'm in North Carolina. I'm picking up my daughter very safely and without contact with any other humans from college and driving her back tomorrow. So
this is above and beyond the call of duty for a council member, I must say. Thank you, Beth, for hanging in there with us.
I'm just glad the Wi-Fi works in the Airbnb.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. All right, Mr. Warner.
Sure. Very, very quickly, as the board knows, one of our functions is to do the master plan consistency review of all development regulations, zoning, and land development ordinances. Governing body introduces, we master plan consistency review. Governing body proceeds with a second read, ultimately public hearing and potentially adoption. We have 2 ordinances on for tonight. And again, what the board does, based upon the advice of our planner, Mr. Behrens, we do not have to find that the ordinances are explicitly, directly, 100% consistent with the master plan. The master plan doesn't have to say, thou can do this or thou shall do that. All we need to do, based upon his advice, is find that the ordinance is substantially consistent with goals and objectives and provisions of one or more of the elements of our master plan. So oftentimes we word it in the double negative. So long as the ordinance is not inconsistent, that's good enough. Close counts in this for master plans consistency reviews, close counts. So with that general overview, I'll I guess turn it over to Mr. Behrens to address the first master plan consistency review that he did for the 2020 development regulations ordinance, a DRO repeal and replace. And he did a memo on that as well. It's not a formal public hearing. No one needs to be sworn in. So he could just take it away from here with the chair's permission.
Tom, please do that. But oddly enough, this looks vaguely familiar.
Deja vu all over again. Yeah.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, Mr. Warner, for the introduction. Tom Behrens, planner with Burgess Associates. So the board knows why we're here and what the duty is in terms of fulfilling the master plan consistency review requirement. Starting with the revised 2020 DRO, we did incorporate the number of comments and issue items that were discussed at the prior board meeting. These were again, amended into the new version of the DRO that was introduced by the council on November 16th. And I believe the intention is that the council will look to potentially adopt the ordinance at their first meeting in December. In our memorandum, which I actually updated with today's date, I parsed out the marijuana ordinance as a separate memo item and kept the one relating to just the DRO issues themselves. They enumerate the number of major policy changes, including the 6 or 7 that we discussed at the last meeting, having to do with the rear yard porch encroachment, the brewery issues, capitalizing certain words, dormers and real estate window signs, et cetera. And we can, touch on any one of those items if anyone feels the need to at this point. I'll jump right into the master plan issues that, are up for discussion. And really this ordinance just moves forward the 2019 ordinance and has not been changed substantially. We did, update certain areas and included certain other policies, but this review is very much similar to the review that was done at the end of last year. And as such, there are a number of applicable master plan goals and policies included in the city's 2000 land use element of the master plan that are broken down in the plan into issues relating to general goals, land use goals, economic development goals, circulation goals, conservation goals, and utility goals. We didn't enumerate them in this, the specific goals in this ordinance, as it would have been a substantially lengthy document. But it's our opinion that in reviewing those goals, that this ordinance and these updates to the ordinance are substantially consistent with the master plan goals and objectives, and that the master plan itself was the guiding document by which this ordinance was created. We also took a look at the 2016 master plan reexamination report, which does have several other specific goals and recommendations specific to this creation of the 2020 DRO and most recent amendments. They include guiding the development to guide development to maintain and enhance the character of Summit, maintain a dynamic and vibrant city, improve connectivity between people and places to promote a healthy and vibrant community, promote a city that is welcoming to residents of all ages, races, ethnicities, abilities, and income ranges, build economic resiliency by supporting reinvestment, preserve and enhance natural beauty, open space, and community facility assets for future generations. And beyond those specific goals posed in the 2016 reexamination report, there are other general themes that I'll just discuss real quick. One has to do with streamlining the city's prior development ordinance. It has to do with enhancing the design criteria of the ordinance, promoting sustainability, encouraging economic development, providing for a variety of housing, addressing new trends in technology and uses, which this 2020 version does above and beyond the 2019 version, as well as address ORC1 zone land use issues. So again, based on our familiarity with the ordinance, having been involved in its preparation, as well as the applicable master plan goals and objectives, it is our position that the ordinance is both not inconsistent with the city's master plan goals and objectives, but is rather substantially consistent. So I'd be glad to answer any questions at this point if the board has them.
No questions regarding the breweries. So if anyone.
You sure you don't want to have just a few, Bill?
I'd like to have a couple of drinks is what I'd like to have. So anyway, anyone have any thoughts, comments, questions with regard to Tom's presentation and us moving this on to council for December 1st hearing? Any comments, questions? Can I have a motion to the effect that we move this on to council?
So moved.
And we'll do a letter of referring back to the governing body that you found it to be not inconsistent, if that is the motion, and the second, which I understand it to be.
Yes, that's the motion. We just
So
made it a little shorter. Yeah.
It's a roll call. I get paid by the word, as we all know. That's why I'm so wealthy. I'm sorry, so a roll call vote if we could, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Chairman Anderson,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Yes.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Yes.
Councilmember Little,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
You're on mute, Ellen.
Yes, yes, yes.
okay, Mr. Deore,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Perrella,
Yes.
and Mr. Fiore.
Yes.
All right, so I guess we passed that. But, I want to thank everybody for all the hard work that went into this effort. Second time's a charm or third time's a charm, whatever it is, it's getting pretty close and it's getting pretty darn good. And I like it. I have a lot of faith in it. I think it's miles and miles ahead of where we were prior to starting this effort. And my fellow team members, Councilmember Little and Mr. Brinkerhoff, thank you very much for being part of this subcommittee. And everybody had a lot of time reading, commenting. So it's really, I think it's an excellent document. Tom, thank you very much for hanging in there with us, writing and rewriting and taking all of our thoughts and suggestions. So and it's a better document because of all the input that we got from everybody. So thanks very much. All right, on to the more interesting second one. And I think, I don't know who should go first, Councilmember Little. Maybe you could give us just a little bit of background in terms of where the council came from with regard to this. And then Steve can give us some guidance from there.
So I can give you some background. I'll also note that Councilmember Naidu is present as an attendee, and he is chair of the admin committee, which, this ordinance came out of his committee. So if we have any further questions, he is also available to answer.
He has also raised his hand. I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, is he here? Is he here? Is he on?
Councilmember Naidu is here, yes.
Oh, is that right? Oh, I didn't see him. Okay.
Would you like him promoted, Chairman Anderson?
Sure, absolutely. We don't want to demote him. We want to promote him.
So I'll give a brief summary and then David maybe can go into more detail. But as we know, there was a question on the ballot for the state of New Jersey to legalize the sale of recreational marijuana, and it passed both statewide and in the city of Summit by fairly margins. And within the legislation there's a period by which municipalities can opt out of allowing the sale within the municipality. And we thought for a variety of reasons that would be in the best interest of Summit at this time. And so we are proposing this ordinance that, of course, still allows the medical marijuana dispensaries, but would at this time at least prohibited the sale of recreational marijuana within the city limits. I will note the ordinance as introduced has some introductory language that we're going to be modifying to take out, some of the language that talks about public safety and the drug-free community. We're going to be removing that language from the ordinance. And we've been told by our city council that that will change the substance of the ordinance so that we won't have to reintroduce it, but we'll just make that amendment. So David, do you have anything to add?
First, it's great seeing everyone. My gosh, so nice, right? So hello, everyone. Beth did a great job of summarizing, but since it was in the admin committee, which I chair, I just wanted to just chime in. First of all, thanks a lot, you guys, for all the hard work that you've been doing. And I've been watching all these Primrose hearings, so I know how long you guys have been working. So thank you on behalf of all of us for what you guys have been doing. So as Beth said, essentially what this ordinance does is gives us some breathing room, because right now, as we understand it from Matt Jacoby, our city solicitor, right now, as we sit here today, if we don't do anything, if there's an application put in, then that applicant has whatever is the current existing zoning requirements and so forth for any business where you could just go ahead and put in a recreational marijuana. And we want to see how this thing evolves and develops through the state. The state has not come out with its implementing regulations yet. There's lots of things to figure out, I gather, from the state perspective. And we want to make sure that if and when, or if at all, Summit ever does something like this, then we know exactly where we stand vis-a-vis the state. And so what this does essentially says, okay, let's take a pause, let's take a freeze. We're not going to do anything with recreational marijuana. Medical marijuana, as you guys all know, there's a compassionate use law already been in place for a significant period of time. And so that's already out there. And so we made this determination, and I hope, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I hope it's relatively clear as to what we're doing. Thank you all again.
David, I have a question.
Hey, Rich, sure.
How are you?
Good.
Good. So the people have voted for this. The residents of the town have indicated they want it. I understand the hesitancy now, given the dynamics out there and the unknowns. But I did find the language to be somewhat questionable.
Well, I get
there was an underlying impression that this isn't the type of clientele or people we want, or isn't the best use for Summit. So that was when I read that.
So
right.
I think I indicated that the introductory language that says that we're doing this to promote public safety in a drug-free community, we are going to be removing that language.
There was other language in it, though. There was a lot of reference to does not benefit the city, does not fall in line with the city. Yeah, there was a number of things in there, which is fine. I understand if we're waiting, and I don't disagree with that. But I thought the language was a little bit, I don't think it was in line. I don't know how to express it properly. I don't want to be inappropriate, but I think it implied certain things that may not actually.
Well, I don't think we're trying to imply anything. So first of all, as we all know, right? So it is not a reflection of people's activities, because this is a DRO. This is not a police regulation. It's not some other type of regulation. It's not a moral regulation. It's nothing like that. This is a zoning regulation of what is permissible or not permissible. And that's what the focus is. And I'll look back at the language, Rich. I can't remember, besides the language that Beth correctly pointed out is going to be stripped out in order to avoid that kind of reference. The prefatory language right now, as it reads, I think has only 2 paragraphs. One is, we've had this referendum pass, and 2, we're going to prohibit the sale and distribution of recreational marijuana. And then it goes on to the changes in the DRO. But there may be other places, and I'm not
there are
debating. I don't want to debate the issue, but I certainly will look at it. But that's not the intent. The intent is purely on the DRO perspective of it. And I guess what I would say is, yes, people voted, but obviously, first of all, we know what Union County overall voted. We don't actually know how the distribution in the city, at least I haven't seen it. People have represented in news articles and media about what is the overall percentage from Union County, but that's not necessarily what Summit is. But let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that there is in fact a majority in Summit. Again, there's what was on the ballot was about decriminalization and legalization for use, but not necessarily where it would be used in Summit, and whether it would be in downtown or neighborhood business districts or near schools, those kinds of issues were not on the ballot for people. And I think what we're saying as at least my committee, and I hope the majority of council is saying, is essentially, when something this important about putting a use that's not previously here in this town, that we do it in a thoughtful manner about its impact. And where it should go, if it should go in anywhere.
No, full agreement. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're on mute again.
Okay, sorry. It's my understanding that this ultimately becomes an amendment, maybe the first amendment to the DRO that we approve on December 1st. So it's not fully baked into the DRO as it goes to council on the 1st of December, but ultimately comes in as an amendment in the future. And maybe David and Beth could give us a little idea of when that might actually occur as an amendment to the DRO, January, February, or December, maybe. Assuming it's passed on December 1st, at some point after that, it becomes a first amendment to the 2020 DRO.
Yeah. So the way that the language of this ordinance is that this ordinance would revise the current DRO and any subsequent DRO, because we didn't know what the timing would be as to when it replace the replace DRO came up in our sequence. So we wanted to make sure that either way it covered. So we didn't want to have it amend the old one and then we'd replace the DRO, then we'd have to pass another one. So this should cover either way. So whenever the new DRO comes out, this will be incorporated into it. But I think the sequence should be both will happen on the same night, which is the December 1st council meeting.
Okay, good. All right, that's good to know. Makes it simpler. All right, Tom, maybe you could give us a run through of your thoughts on its relative consistency to the master plan.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the ordinance before the board is ordinance number 20-3225, again, relating to marijuana land use policies. Specifically, it creates a definition for medical marijuana dispensary, whereas the ordinance, the 2020 DRL we just discussed, does include a number of marijuana related use definitions. This expands that a bit further and really now distinguishes between medical and recreational marijuana uses, which is significant in that this ordinance, again, that we're reviewing takes it a step further and now prohibits specifically recreational marijuana uses, whereas the existing or the 2020 DRO does not make a statement as to that. It merely has definitions. So again, the ordinance is being contemplated for the reasons stated by the council members. Again, addressing New Jersey's referendum that eventually recreational marijuana will be allowed in New Jersey. We don't know what those regulations are going to look like exactly. So this ordinance allows the city to take a look and see how things develop over time. And maybe there will be a time where they allow certain uses or maintain their prohibition against medical and recreational marijuana use. I would say this type of ordinance at this time is not uncommon. We've been involved in implementing similar type ordinances in a number of municipalities throughout New Jersey and many counties. So, this approach, I think, does make sense in many ways. There have been some that don't have any prohibitions, but again, this is being done for the reasons previously stated. So with respect to the master plan consistency review, the first master plan item that we discuss is really it's more like a vision statement that comes from the city's 2000 land use element of the master plan and seems to capture the essence of the land use goals and policies that follow. And I'll just read it briefly. So it talks about Summit is a small residential city that seeks to maintain a high quality of life for all of its residents, manage an appropriate balance between and among residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, recreational uses and public open space, and provide carefully articulated land use regulations for the development and redevelopment of all of these vital community components. So it would seem that this ordinance essentially aims to maintain this balance and residential character of the community as, I run through the various land use goals and policies that are applicable to this ordinance throughout the memorandum. But that seems to be the crux or the theme of, again, why the city's decided to take this approach, basically that the recreational marijuana uses would not work, or we don't know if they would work in many of the settings, again, because we don't have the regulations to review them, and that the city will have an opportunity to see how they develop and can decide in their own time whether or not to allow such uses in the future. Other related goals and development talk about the city's position as a regional center. And again, this is significant in that the city should be careful in the type of uses that it allows, because people are drawn from other locations to shop, dine, and work. So the city wants to ensure that people are coming to the city and attracting people for the right reasons. Again, not suggesting anything about other uses, but once we know more about those uses and how they're being regulated, the city can either maintain or change its position on those types of uses. And generally, I'm not going to go through all the different policies, but while it's recognized that recreational marijuana use would create an economic opportunity and strengthen the tax base, again, it would seem to go against the city's small town residential character, which really seems to be a primary goal of the city. Again, the focus on the residential aspect of the community. And almost all of the goals relating to economic development follow with a provision that talks about a need to balance that goal with the preservation of the city's residential character. The 2016 Master Plan Reexamination Report also includes several land use recommendations directly applicable to this ordinance. They include to guide development to maintain and enhance the character of Summit. Again, the city has determined that recreational marijuana uses would generally be inconsistent with the character of the city and its current land use policies and existing development pattern. A second goal or recommendation rather is to promote a city that is welcoming to residents of all ages, races, and ethnicities, abilities, and income ranges. Again, this seems to underscore that Summit is a family-oriented community and that it needs to take into consideration the needs and concerns of all of its residents, and that the use being discussed in this ordinance would be contrary to that land use policy. And finally, the goal of the 2016 Master Plan Reexamination Report is to encourage economic development, including introduction of new and emerging uses. Medical marijuana in the state of New Jersey was approved or has been permitted for a number of years now. And most recently, recreational marijuana was approved by referendum, but has yet to officially be enabled by the state legislature, but we expect that to happen within the next year or so. And so the city is taking the initiative to address both emerging uses, fairly quickly, and which is again appropriate at this point in time, given the status of those regulations. So it is our opinion that in a review of this ordinance and the applicable master plan goals and objectives of the city, that this ordinance is both not inconsistent with the city's master plan goals and objectives and is rather substantially consistent with those goals and objectives.
Thanks, Tom. Mr. Warner, anything you would add to that?
No, that's it. That's the scope of the authority of the board in this circumstance. It's not to address the merits of the proposed ordinance itself or the language of the proposed ordinance. That's a policy and legislative role of the governing body. The planning board's role is solely to weigh in with the advice of our planner on whether or not this ordinance is not inconsistent with the master plan and its goals and objectives. That is our role in this development regulation adoption process. So that's where we are, and it's for the board, as with the prior introduced ordinance, to move second and vote on whether indeed it is not inconsistent with the master plan and its goals and objectives.
Assuming there's no further discussion, unless there is, would someone make a motion to basically state that this is not inconsistent with the master plan and substantially consistent with the master plan?
So moved.
All right, and a second?
Second.
All right, I guess we need a vote, roll call vote there, Chris.
Certainly. Chairman Anderson.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bringerl.
Yes.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez.
Yes.
Councilmember Little.
Yes.
Ms. McNeil.
Yes.
Mr. Delory.
Yes.
Mr. Zucker.
Yes.
Mr. Perrella.
Yes.
And Mr. Fiore.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. David, it's great to see you. You're welcome to attend anytime.
Good to see you, David.
Wonderful to
Nothing
see
else
you
to
guys.
do. You can just, get on our Zoom calls. It's a lot of fun.
Wonderful to see you all, and to all of you, a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for all you do.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Same to you, David. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good one.
All right. Okay, so we got one other thing of city-related business. Well, it's all city-related, business related to this maybe before we go to executive session, and that's to talk about just briefly the calendar. We all got a copy of the calendar for 2021. Hard to believe it's already 2021. Does anybody see any problems, comments, questions I always love these double asterisks in August. I've been on the board for over a dozen years. I don't think we've ever not met in August, but I'm glad we put those asterisks there. That makes you feel a little better. Anyway, do we have any thoughts, comments, interfere with, I know, Chris, you guys have checked holidays and working with zoning board and working with council and everything else. I can't see anything here that jumps out at me.
Yeah, so I would just add that the board doesn't necessarily have to approve the calendar today. We could do that at the following December meeting if everybody wants a little bit more time with it.
Okay.
It was just on there as a discussion point at this point. Might make sense to just adopt it at the following meeting, or if the board's comfortable with it as is, we can do so tonight. But either way, the January meeting is already.
The board, Joe, shall we punt till next till the 21st of December?
The next meeting is the 21st, right? We changed it from the 28th.
Yes.
Yeah, that was approved by the board. The zoning
Right. Okay. I didn't change my calendar, so I just.
Yeah, 21st.
When are we going to know about the 14th?
Well, that's another question. We may have some conflicts on the 14th.
That's my birthday, and since we smoke pot, we can't smoke pot, and I haven't been able to grow. You
can't go to a brewery
here in downtown yet. I don't know what we're going to do.
We're downtown, Andy. Nobody said anything about whether you're allowed to do it or not.
Yeah. Don't mess with my.
Andy, you just can't buy it.
Yeah, you just can't open you can't open a store downtown. That's all
All
we're
right,
doing.
so I can walk around freely and not get arrested.
Sure.
Yeah, that's right.
On January 1st.
All right, so
Can we
Jay
discuss other dates?
Jay has a conflict. Angie has a conflict. Any other dates there, Chris, that might work?
I would say any day that week that, Steve, what about you and your calendar here? I know that was about the only day you had available, so.
Well, I don't want to limit the board any. If there's a date that works great for the board, we'll do our best.
How about the prior Monday, the 7th? Does that, given that most of us have Mondays committed to, does that work?
Zoning board meets on the 7th.
Just throwing it out.
I would suggest.
Looks like.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a second? How long is the Bristol Myers thing going to be? Like, are they coming for something that's going to be hours, or is it going to be, are we going to be in and out with them? The last time they came for just an amendment to some wording, it took us 10 minutes. If it's 10 minutes on the 14th,
yeah,
I'll go out later. If it's going to be 3 hours like the Primrose thing, I only turned 59 once.
That's going to be in 20 years, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. And I hope Amanda's around to help me with the technology.
Yeah.
So that week.
No, but in all seriousness, is it going to be long or short?
It depends on the amount of public comments, and I know there's been some discussions about, remember when the chiller came here at the last hearing, there's been some other discussions about noise in the area. So it varies about how much public participation will be there. I suggested the week of the 14th because that would provide staff enough time to generate the reports.
How does
Chairman, can I make a comment? The council has an appointment meeting on the night of the 14th as well, so that's another conflict.
How about the 16th? Or the 15th or 16th? Just throwing dates out.
16th is a council meeting.
Oh, okay, that's a Wednesday night.
The 15th works for me.
The 15th, I'm sorry, the 15th is
The 15th, I believe, is a council meeting.
Yeah,
Is it council?
How about the
Yeah.
16th, that Wednesday?
16th?
How about 16? 16 work?
Oh, Steve's giving the double thumbs up on him.
Dave, you said yes? 16 works?
Okay.
Steve, 16 works?
The board's more important than council, but council will be there.
Well, we can always, we can have Amanda maybe if able to join us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or,
16th is.
oh, okay,
16th
all right,
works.
16th, Chris, can we put that in there? 16th?
What, do we know what they're coming before the board for?
They're constructing the infill building for building S3. So it's a site plan that's consistent with their GDP, which they filed. So you guys.
Any variance relief, Chris, if you know offhand?
I think there may be one. I think it's in question. I think Krista's going to determine that in her review, but.
Okay, so it may be close to a conforming site plans.
We do
Would
have
be
an
nice.
issue with the neighbors and sound, and there's a desire for the, I guess, to put in the city right away some additional plantings to deal with sound attenuation, et cetera. So I know there's going to be some interest on the part of the community, I think.
All right,
I would
that's
say,
fine.
So less than an hour, maybe.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
That's on the 6th. So Wednesday, the 16th. We go there.
Remember Martha's famous last words.
Yeah.
Remember that on the 16th.
It wasn't me.
Martha
It
said
was Martha
less than
that
an
said
hour.
that.
Yeah.
He's always getting me in trouble. All right. Okay, 16th is good. So shall we adjourn this portion of the meeting and need a motion to adjourn? Then Chris, you sent out that email with regard to our new.
yeah, I would just add that to that motion that with the caveat that the board will not be reconvening in this regular meeting. So this will effectively end this meeting, and then we will go into executive session and not return.
Okay, that's you sent out at 10:35 p.m. Is that the one that got the new Zoom meeting on it,
You
right?
should have the password in there as well. So yes,
Oh, we need a password, huh?
it's highlighted. So hopefully it's still highlighted.
Oh, it says passcode. Do you need a pass? It's a Zoom
You
meeting.
need a password or just, it's a Zoom?
Just
Well,
Zoom.
You'll have to.
Sometimes you need a password for a Zoom meeting.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, special session ones.
All right. This is
I think they're increasing the use because of hacking and all that.
Yeah.
This is the MI6 version of Zoom. Okay.
All right, I motion to, what are we motioning to?
Motion to adjourn.
To adjourn, yes.
Second.
Executive session.
It's 11:16. I don't know what I'm motioning to.
All right. Okay. I have a second. I didn't hear a second. I have a second.
Second.
Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and reconvene in just a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you all.
Steve,
Happy Thanksgiving.
And everybody else, have a
You
great
too.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Very happy.